Hey everybody, Future Dave here to tell you that in the episode, Keith and I kind of lament the general unavailability of Earthbound and Nintendo's refusal to bring it to modern platforms to allow people to actually play this game that, would stand to make them lots of money and stuff like that. Well, since we recorded this, Nintendo has decided to bring Earthbound to the Switch Online Super Nintendo service. So if you're hearing this, you can go play that right now on the Nintendo Switch Online, provided that you want to pay for that service. So go ahead, enjoy that, and disregard any comments we make in the episode about the unavailability, sadness of Earthbound. It's available now, kind of. You can't just buy it. So, good old friendly neighborhood Nintendo. Got to pay for that online service if you want to hit things with a baseball bat. Okay, enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, my name's Dave Jackson, and this is Tales from the Backlog, a video games podcast where I bring in guests to talk about the games we play. And my guest today is a friend of the show, and I usually know what the guests are enthusiasts about. So, Keith, what's your favorite thing, real quick, that you wrote in the game?
Was it cocaine? It might have been cocaine. Okay. I don't remember if that fit.
Okay. Well, we'll just say it fit. So my guest today is a friend of the show and cocaine enthusiast, host of the Main Quest podcast, Keith Gasper. Hey, dude.
Hey, man. How's it going? Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while now.
Same. This is going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, all the cocaine enthusiasm is going to come out in the chat here.
To say I've been anxious is an understatement, but that also might be the cocaine.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, that's one of the notable side effects. Today's game that we're going to talk about is Earthbound, which is a JRPG developed by Ape Incorporated and HAL Laboratory, first published in Japan by Nintendo in 1994, with a North American release in 1995. The elevator pitch for Earthbound, if you're listening and have never played Earthbound, I'm going to say it is an Americana-inspired JRPG about a boy with a baseball bat who needs to save the world. It's a long elevator. Sound right to you, Keith?
Yeah, it's also famously one of the only RPGs Shigeru Miyamoto ever finished.
Ever finished?
Yeah.
I wonder how many RPGs he started.
He did not like RPGs.
Yeah, I can tell that wasn't exactly like the pillar of Nintendo published stuff
Right.
back in the day, or ever really. So, but before we get into the Earthbound chat, a couple of things first. So the first thing is I really love the Main Quest podcast, and so could you tell my listeners, just explain what is the Main Quest all about?
So the Main Quest is my main quest to essentially replay all of my life's catalog of video games, starting from very early in my life. So I'm currently sitting on my catalog for the NES, all the way through to like my early adulthood. I think my list stops at like 2011, roughly.
Okay.
So it goes through the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and the... I can't really say the Wii. I didn't have a Wii, so just the 360 and the PlayStation 3. So I'm essentially just reevaluating all of these very old games and just try to see if they still hold up today. See if I, on a personal level, still like them, and if I could possibly recommend them to anybody.
Yeah. So I've been listening to the Main Quest. I really enjoy it, and one thing I really enjoy about the show is you're not just like, okay, I'm going to play Super Mario Brothers, and then I'm going to play Metroid, and then I'm going to play some other, Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, and then, okay, Super Nintendo time. You're playing like all of these like weird-ass NES games that I've never heard of. So like my question, I guess, is like, how did you remember all of these games. Do you still have all of these games, or like how did you remember that you played fucking like the Mickey Mouse Mousecapades game or whatever?
Yeah, it took a long. So the premise for the podcast actually started in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
and the podcast started in 2020. Like a lot of podcasts, and
Right.
so
like both of mine.
and so it took 4 years to essentially make this list, and it actually surprisingly wasn't that hard, but it was a lot of just periodically, a lot of just checking websites, looking at like catalogs of box arts and just being like, when you look at something and you're just like, oh yeah, I definitely remember seeing that at Blockbuster and like picking it up. It's a lot of stuff that I'm playing that I even have just the briefest history with.
Okay.
So if I did grab it from a rental store back in the day and maybe even just spent a day or two with it, I'm still going to count it, which makes the list a lot larger. Some of the games are also, I guess, games that I guess I shouldn't say I owned all of them. Some of them were probably games that I spent a lot of time with at a friend's house also playing.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, I can kind of count it as being part of my life in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then also my brother, he's about 9 years older than me. So when we had an NES, he was already like getting like allowances from my parents, birthday presents, what have you. So there's always just, as long as I've been alive, there have been video games.
Right.
So they've always just kind of been there. And obviously the older we got, my brother got jobs before I did. And so we were constantly getting new systems, new consoles. So it was a lot of just kind of him and I going back and forth, trying to figure out also like what was in the house.
Mm-hmm.
There is stuff that he mentioned that I totally have no memory of. We actually had an Atari Jaguar.
Okay.
I don't remember having that at all, so I'm just not going to count it because of just like we did. And we had it for maybe like a month or two. So it wasn't very long. I think we traded in for a PlayStation, which was the better decision in the long run. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I even answered your question, but
No, yeah, totally. Like, because when I was like, ever since I started listening to your show, I started to think about like, okay, so my first game system was a Game Gear, but I don't remember all the games that I had for it. I just remember playing this Power Rangers game forever, but I know it wasn't the only game I had. So I was just curious, like, how do you even remember? I mean, or maybe your memory is just not as shitty as mine is. My brain cells are all burned out and stuff like that. So
I think there's a term for like being able to remember stuff from your early, because there's a lot of just really non-specific stuff that I remember when I was very, very young.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even make sense for me to remember any of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I don't remember shit before I was like 9 years old. So
So yeah, I don't, either that stuff was either really traumatic and had like a lasting impression on me, but yeah, I don't even know what we're talking about at this point anymore. But I wanted to just say, like, going back to like the weird games that I do talk about. Yeah, that was one of the things that I really wanted to present with the podcast. I didn't just want to be the retro gaming podcast that panders to a certain crowd where I'm only playing the hits.
Right, exactly.
Because you never know. I mean, by the time this comes out, my episode on Wizards and Warriors comes out. Do you know what Wizards and Warriors is?
Nope, never heard of it.
It's a actually really decent 1987 game by Rare.
Okay.
And it's just one of those games where I think a lot of people who are really into retro gaming will be like, oh, wow, somebody put out an episode of Wizards and Warriors. Nobody talks about that game. In fact, it was very hard to find information on that game when I tried to do the deep dive into the development.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I'm looking for. Like, I could easily put out a Super Mario Brothers episode, which I did do. and that can just get lost in all the noise of everybody else talking about Super Mario Brothers.
Right.
Games like those, games like we're going to talk about today, Earthbound, have been talked about to death. And it's like, what, if anything, can I even bring new to the table? It's so much easier to talk about a game that's not being talked about.
Yeah. And like, I would say once a month or at least once every other month, you have a game on your show that I have literally never heard of, like never heard anyone even mention in conversation. So those are always cool to hear what some of these games are about and to hear your opinions on them, because as with, I don't know, I've made my opinions clear from time to time that I think a lot of old games are either bad or not very fun at the very least. So like I salute you for going through some of these games that end up just being really fucking terrible, but I really enjoy listening to you kind of tear them apart when they are really bad.
And I do want to add too that it's not only retro that like 90% of the show is retro games, but every once in a while, periodically, I will cover a more modern games. So I've covered like Horizon Zero Dawn, The Last of Us Part 2, Returnal, stuff like that. So I do cover modern games from time to time.
Yeah, and those are also really good. So everybody listening to this show, go check out the Main Quest podcast. There's going to be links in the show notes for that. It is a good time. I really enjoy that show.
Thank you.
Before we get into talking about Earthbound, the other thing that we need to talk about is the other games that we've been playing recently. So, Keith, other than catching up on Earthbound, what have you been playing?
I guess I can talk about Resident Evil 7, because for those of you who aren't familiar with my podcast, I'm doing a separate series on the mainline Resident Evil games, the story. I'm just going through the story and the lore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't ever really talk about the gameplay unless it's necessary. So I've part of my brain is non-functioning, having played all of these games. I started a year ago, and I have played 8 games so far. I have 1 more to go. I played 0 through 7, and I have forgot how to do long division at this point, because it's just replaced with Resident Evil.
Story and lore, not even gameplay. You're getting into like the totally weird shit from the series story and lore of Resident Evil.
I'm not proud of myself, but also like, man, it's been a journey. But yeah, man, so after playing Resident Evil 6, I went straight to Resident Evil 7. And I don't know if you've seen my stuff on like Instagram or Twitter about me just bashing Resident Evil 6. It was the game I had to take a break from. I took like a 2-month break from playing those games because I thought I was all Resident Evil'd out after playing them consecutively. And I came back to Resident Evil 6 after a break, and I was like, no, I wasn't Resident Evil'd out. I just really hate this game. Mm-hmm. Resident Evil 6 sucks. It's really bad. Keep in mind, like, I haven't played any of the Resident Evils. So going straight from 6 to 7 was like having whiplash, because 7 is so different from 6. It is, all intents and purposes, a horror game. It goes back to kind of the old tropes of the first like 3 games or so. And man, I mean, I know you don't really like scary games.
I don't.
I love scary games.
Yeah.
But this was too much. This was too much. It was a lot of sweaty palms and a lot of me just, so for instance, this isn't really a spoiler. It happens pretty early in the game, but there's a guy following you around the house. And I was literally like, he was searching for me. I could hear him walking around the house, and he's looking for me. And I'm just sitting in the corner of a room, like backed up against the wall with like the handgun pointed at the door, waiting for him to walk in. And I must have sat there for maybe like 5 minutes doing nothing, just waiting for him, because I was just terrified to walk out of the room.
Oh man. sometimes so like you're right, I don't like scary games. I don't play very many scary games. Sometimes I'll get like I'll play a game that is kind of scary, but it doesn't, like Bloodborne is scary for some people. Bloodborne doesn't scare me. It's just very different. Or like I played Soma. I talked about Soma on the show. So after doing one of those games, I'll start to get this idea like, hey, you should, play one of these other like acclaimed scary games. You might be missing something. That's my thing. It's always like FOMO. You might be missing something. So I checked out a Let's Play of Resident Evil 7. I watched like 5 minutes of it. And I was like, I am never fucking playing that game. Absolutely the fuck not. Never.
But I generally play my games at night, so it's like I totally immerse myself. I'll turn off the lights. I usually play games with headphones on, and the sound design in that game is incredible. It's so good.
Yeah,
it's one of the things that just makes it extremely terrifying. There's a lot of, it's so different from Resident Evil 6. There's just a lot of silence in the game, which just makes it that much more unsettling. It's great.
You were like the only person that I know who has ever talked about Resident Evil 6. It's like
there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I know. So like as someone who's not a fan of the series, I've never played a Resident Evil game. It's really like if I didn't have like the logic of knowing that obviously there must be a game between Resident Evil 5, which people say is like really weird but good in a weird way, and then Resident Evil 7, which people say is like actually really good. If I didn't know that like logically there must be a sixth game in there, I would have just assumed that there wasn't. Like they just skipped from 5 to 7 for some reason because no one ever talks about it.
It's Call of Duty. Resident Evil 6 is literally just a Call of Duty game.
Okay.
Where there's a zombie T-Rex running around China knocking buildings over and you're crashing jet fighter planes into tiny Asian women like
Oh man. You're making actually a really good sell for Resident Evil 6 right now. That sounds pretty fun.
That's what I hear. Every time I bring that game up and I'm like, this is why it sucks, everybody's like, man, it sounds like I should really play that game. And I'm like, you don't want to.
It probably sounds way better than it actually is.
Yeah, on paper it sounds great, but no. So, what have you been playing, man?
Oh, man. So, like, this is hard because I'm only playing stuff for the show right now. I'm playing the new Pokemon game. There will be an episode about that coming up at some point in the future. I'm recording that in the future. And that game rules, by the way. It's amazing. And Yakuza Like a Dragon, which will also be an episode of the show. So I don't want to get into my thoughts, but I am playing those. There's a sneak peek of like what's coming up later on the show.
That's the life, though. That's why I'm like, I can't really say what I'm playing for the most part, or at least talk about it.
That's why like half the time during this opening discussion, I don't give any games that I'm playing because everything I'm playing is probably going to end up on the show at some point.
Yeah, every time I start a monologue at the beginning of my episodes, like, what do I address? What do I talk about? Because more often than not, it's not a video game because playing games for the show. So
yeah, exactly.
The episode's coming.
And if I play a game and I like it enough to like play it to the end, I'm going to do an episode of the show about it. That's how the show works. And if I play I don't know, I talked about Final Fantasy 15 on a podcast a long time ago, and I was like, yeah, I like it. I'm a few hours in. I'm going to keep playing. And then I played a couple more hours and decided that game's horrible. So it's not going to be an episode of the show unless I want to do an episode and just talk about how the first 10 hours go or something like that.
Are you one of those guys that, I don't know, reads a review online or something and it matters to you if that person finished the game or not to review it?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Especially if it's a long game.
Because I feel like 10 hours into Final Fantasy 15 is pretty well past the mark where you can make a solid opinion about it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's I don't think it's far enough into the game where you can like fully comment on the game as a whole. If you play 10 hours of Slay the Spire, you can probably comment on Slay the Spire, but I think 10 hours of Final Fantasy 15 is long enough to make my own opinion about whether it's a a fun game or not.
I don't know, man. Because if it takes longer than 10 hours for somebody to get into a video game, that's pretty bad.
Yeah. And I will say this too. I'm guilty of this too, where I say, like, you know, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 gets really good like 35 hours into the game. You gotta trust me.
No, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand. I totally get that. If people hear that and they're like, okay, I'm not playing that, I get it. But it does. It gets really good 35 hours into the game. And 75 hours? Holy shit, Keith.
I'll take your word for that.
All right. Let's get into Earthbound. I think it's time.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right, so we begin by, first of all, issuing a declaration that there will be a spoiler section at the end of the podcast. So if you haven't played Earthbound, you can still listen to the episode all the way until we get to that spoiler wall. We will make it very clear when it's spoiler time. So until then, you can listen with a relaxed heart. We also begin the show by talking about our histories with Earthbound, and talking about our histories with the Mother series if you've played other games in the series. So the guest always goes first. Keith, when did you first play Earthbound? Can you remember, like, what is it that made you want to play it?
Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Because this is my chance. This is going to be just the next half hour of me talking like a total hipster.
Okay.
So as far as Earthbound goes, I don't think I played it exactly when it came out. It might have been like the year after or something. So I want to say 1995, because I know I played this side by side with Super Mario RPG. And so with that in mind, that was a hell of a year. That was a hell of a year for me. I don't know if you played Super Mario RPG or not, but...
Not as a kid, no.
So I played this pretty close to release, I would say.
Okay.
And every time I went to my grandma's house, I essentially begged my parents to let me go to Toys R Us because it was so close to where she lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so the day I got Earthbound was one of those days that we ended up going. I'm not exactly sure, but I think I got like Earthbound as maybe like a birthday gift, because there's just no way that my parents would have spent that much money for a video game on me, because I think back then Earthbound was like $80, which, like, with inflation is probably like around $120 right now.
Yeah,
so
$775.
Because I mean, people think games are expensive now, but some of those cartridges were really expensive to produce back then, and some of them used special chipsets and everything and all different boards. So a lot of JRPGs, because they were so large and needed special boards put inside the cartridges, they were much more expensive than something like F-Zero or Super Mario World or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I don't think I knew what Earthbound was when I saw it at Toys R Us, if I'm going to be honest. I saw the box, and it was just like this big, gigantic SNES box. It had like this giant golden dildo looking thing on the front of it.
Uh-huh.
And the box was like, the box is like 3 times the size of a regular NES or Super NES box. And so in my mind, in my child brain, I was like, oh, this game has to be awesome. Like, there's no way that this game isn't going to be good.
Yeah, better games get bigger boxes. Everybody knows that.
Exactly, right. I'm like, there's nothing else makes sense except to get this game. And so, they got it. I remember opening the box, like, immediately, like, in the car, even though I was, like, several hours away from playing it. And, talking about that large box. Yeah, I remember being disappointed not pulling out this giant gray piece of plastic that would somehow fit in my Super Nintendo. But instead, what came with it, which was, I guess, even bigger surprise, because there's a lot of people might not realize this, but video games used to come with these little books made of paper called manuals,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of a manual, Earthbound came with like a full-size player's guide. So that thing is so awesome. I dare you to find me a player's guide that's cooler than the Earthbound player's guide. It was so stylized. It was made to essentially look like a travel brochure. And it came with like all this original artwork. I don't know if you might have seen a lot of the artwork for this game where it just kind of looks like these 3D clay models.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm looking at pictures right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where all that came from. It's just something about that guide is just so very distinct. And on top of that, the entire box, when you open it, because the player's guide was in there and it came with the scratch and sniff stickers, that entire box just smelled like shit. It smelled so bad. Because I don't know if you know, but the scratch and sniff stickers were part of the marketing for this game.
Oh, really?
Which did not go over very well for Nintendo at all, because they were very much in their play it loud era, the Ren and Stimpy, gross out humor era. And I think the marketing slogan for Earthbound was "This game stinks." And so I think a lot of people took it at face value and was like, this is probably a bad
real
game.
Galaxy Brain marketing thing there.
Yeah. So that aside, yeah, I mean, the game certainly did stink because it was sitting with these scratch and sniff stickers for God knows how long since it came off the production line.
Mm-hmm.
I swear that cartridge, like, if you put your nose up to it, like now, it would probably still just smell like this weird, like, combination of old shoes and a shit stain or something. Like, those scratches of stickers were putrid. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they were thinking. But as far as, I guess, like, going back to the guide, like, I read that guide probably more than I actually played the game, just because, again, it didn't look like a regular player's guide. It didn't look like a regular walkthrough, even something that you would get off of like IGN or something today. Like, they took so much care in exploring the lore of, like, not only the entire game, but like each town that you visit, and expanding the landmarks. They elaborated on the story. Like, every time you would reach a new area in the guidebook, it was presented as like a newspaper clipping, and it would just like have these little bits of detail that aren't actually like in the game.
Ooh,
but
cool.
Like, when you read it, it somehow made sense. And then when you went to go play the game, it was like, I don't know, we're going to talk about it with the story and characters and stuff like that, but it just made everything just seem so much more real, so much more elaborate, I guess. So as far as the game goes itself, like, I mean, I played it like crazy. At the time, I had a friend who was like very heavily into JRPGs, and between the both of us, we were kind of both dragging each other to one another's house and like just showing each other like our current JRPG addiction, whether it may be like Secret of Evermore or like Brave Fencer Musashi, Saga, Pokemon. We got each other into that. We would just come into each other's house, pop in the cartridge or disc or whatever, and just basically lose our fucking minds. But Earthbound was like special because, unlike those other games, this was like one of the I never shared like JRPGs like with my other friends who played video games, because I knew that wasn't their jam. But for some reason, Earthbound was like the one game where I was like telling everybody, I'm like, you guys should play this. You guys should come over, check it out, or whatever. Let me come over, check it out. One of those people was my cousin, and this is kind of where I'm going to end my rant a little bit. And he had a SNES, but he didn't have like a lot of games for it, save for like Super Mario World and like just the basic stuff. He probably had like F-Zero or whatever. His family is like incredibly strict, so I'm even surprised that he had a console at all.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came to video games, like when we came over and we were going to play video games, we had like 20 minutes to play, and that was pretty much it. So you bring over a game like Earthbound, and 20 minutes isn't really going to get you anywhere.
Right.
And I told him, I left it at his house, and I was like, you have to see this through. And he liked it. He did like it. And I'm like, you got to see this through. You have to play this whenever you can. And that was the last time I saw that cartridge. I actually, to this day, I don't know if he beat it or not.
He's still playing it. He's playing it 20 minutes, 20 minutes at a time once a week. He's probably still playing.
That's going to be very true. It's honestly like one of the worst mistakes I ever made in my life, because consider, you look at how much Earthbound is going for now.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where I'm just like, I should have gotten that back from him at some point.
Yes. Or I should have never given that shit away. Like, if I could, people ask you, Keith, what advice would you give to your younger self? You're like, you know, fuck buying Bitcoin, fuck, you know, like not talking to this girl. Don't lend Earthbound to your cousin. Just don't do it. Even if he cries, just say no. You can't borrow it. Sorry.
What's that guy's name who made the chain out of a Pokemon card?
Oh, I don't know.
the YouTuber, the boxer, what's his name?
Oh, one of the Paul brothers.
Yeah, one of the Paul brothers. Yeah, he made this giant chain, and it had a holographic Charizard. And that's what I would have done with Earthbound. I would have turned it into a chain and wore it around, because it's worth so much fucking money. That's my flex. But I fast forward like real quick. So like, color be surprised, right? When it's like the very early 2000s, and I play Smash Brothers,
right?
And I see Ness, and I'm like, I feel like I'm the only person in the entire world who's like, holy shit, like, somebody remembered. Somebody at Nintendo knows what Earthbound is. What the hell is this? Like, wow. And then, like, I don't know, it dawns on you, and you're just like, oh yeah, Hal made Super Smash Brothers. Like, of course.
Right. I was on the other end of that. So, like, I played Super Smash Brothers long before I knew what Earthbound was. So, like, I got, you know, I was just like, who the fuck is this kid with the PK Fire and the baseball bat and all of that? I was like, you know, Ness is really good in Super Smash Brothers, so I was I was always curious about like what game he came from, but I think I looked it up, and it was like, oh, Earthbound, it's a Super Nintendo game that you'll never find. So, okay, I'll never play that. And then, you know, later on, when I discovered emulators, I actually played Mother 3 a few times, or like started it a few times. Have you ever played Mother 3?
I have never finished it. Because I played it on, I think I talked about this on my show before. I played it on a very shitty phone emulator.
Yeah, me too.
Which is not the best way to play that game.
Right. So there's some game mechanics in Mother 3 that don't work on that shitty phone emulator that I played it on. Probably the same as you. So I played a little bit of that, but I had never played Earthbound because when I was a kid, I didn't have a Super Nintendo. None of my friends had Earthbound. And like it, as we know, it never got re-released on, you know, Game Boy Advance. Like a lot of other Super Nintendo RPGs got re-released on DS or Game Boy Advance or something like that. Earthbound never did. Same with that Switch, you know, SNES online thing, no Earthbound. So what actually did it for me was I got a 3DS that has been hacked. It has all the emulators and stuff on it. So I was finally able to play it handheld, which is how I prefer to play all long JRPGs, as to play handheld. I would never play through all of Earthbound on my computer. It's just the way that I just can't do that. You know, emulated games on my computer doesn't fit with my like gamer demographic or whatever.
No, yeah, I can't do that either. I have to play it on the hardware, which is like I have it, but it's all hacked, like kind of like what you said.
Yeah. So I don't know. All of my Super Nintendo emulation in the past has been very like Final Fantasy VI focused. I've emulated Final Fantasy VI like 25 times throughout my life. But like I was still always interested in playing Earthbound because people say it's good. It's one of those hipster games, as you said, that like, you know, some of my friends that are hipsters will be like, yeah, I played Earthbound. What's up? You know, like I played it in 1996.
I was going to say, but did they play it in the 90s and
Yeah,
not
exactly.
in 2006 when it started popping off again?
That's the hipster move. But I was always interested in trying it. So like when I got that 3DS with the emulator on it, I was like, okay, now I can play it with save states. I can play it portable. I can play it, you know, when I'm on the subway or something like that. So that really helped me get like that push to play it. And then when you and I were talking about what games to play, I was kind of listing like some games I had on like the short list, and you said Earthbound, and I was like, okay, this is the time, Dave, play Earthbound, because you and I have been talking about doing this episode for quite some time now. So
yeah, and I've been anxious about it because I know you don't like anything that came out prior to 2010. So
that's you're off by a few years, but you're not lying. I am not a fan of a lot of old games. So we'll get into Earthbound and we'll see what I think about this. For anyone listening, if you're kind of curious about how long Earthbound is, if you're thinking about playing it and, you know, curious, my game took me 26 hours to play and beat. However, that is for sure aided by the fact that I had save states. And if I died in a boss battle, I would just reload a save state and not go all the way back to wherever the fuck your checkpoint is at that particular part in the game. So it will probably take you longer if you play it on a Super Nintendo. But yeah, I suggest you play it emulated because who the fuck has the Super Nintendo cart anymore anyway? So
unless you're somebody on eBay.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that sounds about right. This is one of those games that you could spend like at least a solid 40 hours with.
Yeah, I definitely can see that.
Normally.
I also played with a guide. I'll just get that out in front. There's a fantastic guide on, I think it's called starman.net. It is an amazing kind of like retro internet looking guide. It's really good. I played with that. I play a lot of games with guides.
Which, I mean, to go back to my point, you shouldn't be ashamed about that because the game was sold with a guide.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed of playing any games with guides. I play Dark Souls games with guides, and you know, a lot of the joy for a lot of people is like bumbling around in those games. It's just not like what I find fun in a lot of games. So I play a lot of games with guides. But you're right, especially the old ones that came with manuals or like full-size player's guides like you were talking about.
Yeah.
Whatever's going to help you have fun and enjoy the game, do it that way. And so I did that, and that also cut down some hours off of my playtime, I'm sure, because I knew exactly where I needed to go next all the time. So let's get into the basics of Earthbound and kind of what makes Earthbound special. The story setup in Earthbound is you play as Ness, who, again, Ness is the famous PK Fire spam boy from Super Smash Bros., who wakes up in the middle of the night because a meteorite has struck his hometown in the country of Eagle Land, and this is your first clue about the American influences in the game, and I'll talk about those in a little bit.
The entire continent of Eagle Land is actually an eagle.
Is it? It's shaped like an eagle.
It is.
Fucking American. That's more American than anything else I've ever heard. So the setting of Eagle Land is a kind of, like we said, it's a real world setting, unlike a lot of JRPGs or RPGs in general, where, you know, this is not Final Fantasy setting. This is, you know, it has towns and houses that look like, you know, what we'd imagine our own cities and stuff to look like, especially the big cities in the game. The whole game is kind of modeled after this, like, United States and just like Western culture in general. And I guess I'll get my opinion on this out later. I was shitting on Final Fantasy 15 earlier in the podcast. Final Fantasy 15 also goes for this like Americana road trip aesthetic, and I think it's horrible in Final Fantasy 15. It does not feel like they have ever met an American person or been to the United States or even watched a YouTube video that took place in the United States. In Earthbound, though, it feels very it feels like people have spent extended time in the United States, or they're extremely familiar with what the US is actually like, while at the same time making it caricatured and funny and, you know, satirical in some ways. I think that this like Americana and Western like theming of Earthbound is really, really good. I think it works really, really well. I love it. And just one more time, Final Fantasy 15 failed miserably at that, and I'll take every chance to shit on that game I get. But Earthbound really nails it. I love it.
And it's not only in the setting, which they do a very good job at nailing, but it's also in the dialogue. And for the months leading up to recording this episode, I was dying to get my hands on Clyde Mandelin's Legends of Localization book on this game specifically, but it has been sold out for forever. So Fangamer, get your shit together. Let's go. Let's make this happen.
I have a lot of pull in the industry. We'll make it happen.
So yeah, I've been trying to get a hold of that, and so a lot of that, you know, slice of American pie comes down to just how good the localization of this game is. And a lot of retro, again, I think you probably got one of the best people to talk about a retro game with you. A lot of retro games were terribly localized. I mean, Final Fantasy VI sucks. Final Fantasy VII famously sucks. And a lot of this comes down to just the localizers not having a lot of time to do an entire game in, especially a JRPG. Get the fuck out of here. So I don't remember who localized Earthbound off the top of my head, but I know that, you know, Hal and Ape and Atoy basically were just like, we trust you on this, you know, kind of do whatever you want as long as it makes sense in the context of what's happening, what you see is happening. And so that's very much where it gets its very American flavor, because essentially an American translated it. I mean, a lot of Americans translate it, but it's very much like in the context of an American, like he had free liberty to just kind of interpret the script as whatever he kind of wanted it to be, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like the American kind of influences go into, yeah, like you said, dialogue, like kind of plot. Like there are specific plot events that happen throughout the game that feel very American to me. There's, you know, it's like religious cults, and they feel like things you've seen in the news from the United States. There's, and just like little details like, you know, you heal by getting very American food, pizza, hamburgers, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's very, I don't want to say that these things are exclusively American, but, you know, like all the whole package, you know, eating pizza, hamburgers, Ness carries a baseball bat, you get, you know, yo-yos and stuff like that. It's very, the whole package is just very, very American. And once again, it's really good and it's charming, as opposed to Final Fantasy 15's. Well, howdy. I reckon you ought to go find a chocobo, which is just like,
what the fuck?
You know, not that I'm like going to get mad if people like misrepresent the great country of the United States, because that's not really like something that I care about, but you got to make it cool and charming and good, and not just like this, you know, extremely caricaturized bullshit like some other game that I've mentioned 60 times already, and I'm not going to mention it anymore in the episode. You guys are lucky I'm not comparing it to Dark Souls, but
you know, if you could somehow make that comparison to this game,
that's my challenge. It's my challenge for the rest of the episode. All the credit in the world.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff, the Americana, there's a lot of that stuff already baked in, which I'm sure only helped with the localization. Stuff like Broadway shows and, like you said, the hamburgers. And
yeah.
even tons of movie references, American
Right.
movie references and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So the story itself starts out with Ness going out to investigate that meteor strike with his, I'm doing air quotes here, his friend Pokey, who is the worst from the beginning, but is very funny. His dog, named King. And I'm using canon names here. You can name the characters whatever you want. And at the beginning, they'll also ask you what your favorite thing is. And I think they'll also ask you what your favorite food is, or maybe those are the same question. But they'll ask you to name the characters, and then they'll ask you a few questions. And you might be tempted to say, like, my favorite thing's pussy. But that will come back to bite you in a bad way later in the story, I think. There's one specific moment where I would have felt very gross if I had said my favorite thing was pussy at the beginning. So
You mean you don't want your mom calling you and be like, why don't you come home for some pussy?
Exactly. Yeah. I would have been like, oh. Well, I mean, mom says I have to. I guess I have to. So anyway, you're going out. You find out that you need to collect these 8 melodies from these like magical sites around the world, and you need to stop the cosmic chaos embodiment of Gigas. I'm going to pronounce it Gigas, Keith. What do you got?
I've always said Gygas, and I've heard
Okay.
Gigas. So
God damn it! There we go. It's always with these old JRPGs. Do you say do you say Titus or Titus? Do you say
Titus.
Celis or Celis or whatever?
Did you ever hear my Aerith problem when I was younger?
No.
So until there was so played Final Fantasy VII when it came out,
Right.
and it famously, because the localization was terrible in that game, her name, the flower girl, was spelled Aeris.
Right.
So naturally, I was like, it's Ares. And so me and my friend always just called her Ares.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the internet got popular, people were like, oh, it's really Aerith or Eris. And so a lot of people called her either Eris or Aerith. And I used to think that these type of people probably should not have an opinion on the internet, but turns out I was the wrong one all along. Now that voice acting is a thing and localization is pretty much perfect at this point.
Right.
And so it's very hard for me to accept that her name is Aerith, but whatever.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow when you find out you've been wrong the whole time. You are joined by your party members in the game, the ones that you name at the beginning, but their canonical names are Paula, Jeff, and the one who drew the short stick, whose name is Pooh. Yeah. So supposedly the party members were all supposed to have Beatles names or Beatles-inspired names, as a story I heard. I don't know if you can confirm or deny, but only Paula survived the potential copyright claim there. Just a story I heard.
I never heard of that. I did hear about the music.
Okay.
I don't know if we're going to talk about that later. I feel like that's something everybody knows about this game, but
it's not something I knew, so save that for later. We'll get into talking about music. And so you are on this mission to go to these 8 places, collect these 8 melodies with your party members, Paula, Jeff, and Pooh, who are doled out very spread out throughout the game. You'll get them I feel like you get them at basically like the quarter marks of the game. So like a quarter of the way through the game, you'll get your first party member, and then you get them slowly. It's not like
I feel
putting
like you
the
get
band.
Paula pretty early.
It's pretty. You go through a couple of towns though before you get Paula, and then it's like a couple more towns. I feel like before you get Jeff.
Yeah, I know Jeff and Pooh take a while, but
yeah, you go through a few towns by yourself as Ness.
Maybe I've just played this game so much that it's just quicker for me. Maybe.
Yeah, it was part of my frustration early in the game when you only have Ness, and I think that's when the game is at its most difficult, is when it's just Ness in the party.
There's a couple times when you're on your own with each of the characters.
Yeah.
Not so much Paula, but I know there's a time you spend with just Jeff and just Pooh.
Yeah, exactly. I guess the part with Jeff I thought was pretty easy, but most the other two, the parts where you just have one character, it gets tough. But we'll talk about that when we get into the kind of talking about the combat mostly, I guess. One thing I want to note is that I played with a guide, but if you're playing this game without a guide, there are a couple systems in the game that will help you find out where to go next. So it's not like an old game where you have zero direction whatsoever, or a new game where you have zero direction. In each town, there is a house or a booth where you can pay to get a hint, where he'll just straight up tell you where to go, basically. And a lot of times, like the characters in the story, and this is one thing that is kind of interesting about like the writing and stuff, the characters in the story will often say very meta things or just straight up tell you where to go. They'll say like, you need to go here. I'm not sure why, but you'll need to go to this city now. Gigas will hate it if you go to this city right now. So you always kind of have a good idea of what direction you need to go in. Or if you are lost, you just go pay like a few bucks to the hint kid. Yeah.
I will say that this, for a JRPG and a very relatively early JRPG, it's pretty linear. It isn't too bad. There's some backtracking that you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like you said, like it's made pretty clear exactly where you have to go, so it isn't too bad. I do just want to go back to when you were talking about the menu screen when you start the game.
Mm-hmm.
And right off the bat, man, I'm gonna gush a little bit here, but it's like right off the bat, you're introduced to that weird screen where it kind of looks like you're watching like an alien invasion on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And then it brings in the text from the Earthbound logo or whatever, and the music starts playing. And immediately, as soon as you kick into like hitting new game, it has its own music. It's a colorful screen. The characters kind of do like a roll call, like come in, do their own little animations and stuff, which is just, in the context of 1994, like nobody was doing that. It was always just a black screen with a text box and you're just entering in your name and that's it. It's little things like that that are just like spread out throughout this entire game where it's just like, this is something special, No, it's stuff like that that makes this game to me hold up much better than something like Dragon Quest 5 or something,
Yeah, that intro screen is really good. You can, like, they give you a lot of options too. Like, you can name all the characters. You can set like a color palette for the menus and stuff throughout the game, which is, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to really change your experience a whole lot. No. But like they are, I don't know, it's just kind of adds to like the charm of the game. And also, dude, that menu, you brought up the music. Let's just talk about the music in the game now a little bit. Earthbound has some of the most diverse, like, it has some songs that sound like, RPG type music, and some of the songs already if you played Super Smash Brothers, but the stuff that's not in Super Smash Brothers is some of the weirdest fucking music I've ever heard, especially in like a Super Nintendo game. Like, I've played a lot of, Returnal. Returnal has a weird soundscape and soundtrack, but it's this weird, sci-fi horror type game. Earthbound is an RPG set in a very familiar setting to all of us, but the music is so goddamn weird in a lot of places. It's like atonal sometimes. It's got all these weird boops and beeps, and you're going to hear the music interspersed throughout the episode here. But it's like the battle theme it's not this like bombastic JRPG battle music. It's this very,
and it's always different depending on who you're fighting too.
Yeah.
Like if you're fighting one of the UFOs or like the robots or something, it's like this really weird, like droning techno song. And like at some point, like within like the first 40 seconds of the song playing, it stops for a second and you think like, oh, it's about to go into like another loop or something like that. But then it totally just changes up and is something completely different from what it originally started sounding like.
I don't know. I just keep thinking like I saw, a meme. Here we go, everybody. I'm about to explain a meme, but it was like, it was like on one side you have all of the other RPGs that we think of that have like this, I personally, I love JRPG music. I love, Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger has great music, on and on and on through the years. And then it's like all these other games on one side. And then over here, all by itself is whatever the fuck Earthbound's music is, which is, it's so unique compared to like seriously any other game I've ever played. And like there are several times throughout the game when I was playing and I would legit like start laughing because of how ridiculous the soundtrack is. Like they made no effort to make it fit the specific place in a way that a lot of games do. Like I'm specifically thinking of the desert song right now. When the bus,
That's so good.
When the bus is blocked from going through the tunnel and you have to go walk out in the desert. No one would ever make a desert song that sounds like that. We have an idea of what, an ice level music sounds like in our head now. And we have an idea of what a cave sounds like from all these games we've played. But Earthbound just says, fuck that. We're making things that like, we just think this sounds cool. We're going to put it here. It doesn't fit the environment, but it's cool. And for some reason, like, it's really good. I love it.
And it fits so well, and what it does is, which I don't think enough credit is given to this fact, is that when you first walk into that area, you're not able to progress to Foreside because there's a traffic jam.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you walk into the desert area, there is this weird kind of like radio static and like this weird like electronic humming.
Mm-hmm.
That's like so it's quiet, but it's noticeable enough. And it gives that area so much more atmosphere than just you're just sitting in a desert like any other JRPG going from one place to another. It makes it sound like people are sitting in this desert in gridlock traffic with their windows down, trying to get some reprieve from the heat, and you can hear all the radios coming out of the cars. It's just such a little thing that, again, it's the little details in this game that make it stand out from a lot of its contemporaries at the time.
And then, like, there's a picture of the famous Starman on the cover, so it's not like a big spoiler to, or like, you're fighting a cosmic deity, Gigas, at the end of the game. They tell you this in the first 15 minutes of the game, so it's not really a spoiler to say you're going to deal with like some cosmic stuff later in the game, and the soundtrack for that is sufficiently weird when you're dealing with cosmic horrors to the best that the Super Nintendo sound chip can handle. They got really, really creative with this soundtrack, and as a result, it's one of the most unique and memorable soundtracks of any, a lot of JRPG or RPG soundtracks in general can kind of blend together, overworld themes and stuff like that. But Earthbound is so different. It totally stands out. It's great.
There's something to be said that, like, when you're talking about how the music fits almost any situation, when you run into an enemy and you're like, okay, what the hell is this thing? And it's like, you ran into New Age Retro Hippie. And you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And then the music starts playing, and then it matches the encounter also, and you're just like, what is happening here? Like, what is going on? But it doesn't skip a beat. It's like, it's supposed to like be there, and obviously the New Age Retro Hippie has a reason for existing also, get into that later if you really want. But so the people that worked on this soundtrack is Keiichi Suzuki and my man, the fucking probably one of the best composers that Nintendo had at the time, Hirokazu Hip Tanaka.
Mm-hmm.
It's a murderer's row of people who worked on this soundtrack, and it's no wonder it's why it's as good as it is. It's also as good as it is because of copyright infringement, which is, so they stole a lot of stuff. So, and I, you can't see me, but I put stole in quotations here.
Uh-huh.
So one of the biggest theories surrounding like the re-release of Earthbound was that a lot of the bands that they were kind of ripping off would kind of take the Nintendo to court over the music, but that's kind of, I believe Toei basically was just like, no, that isn't the case. We still kind of really don't know why Nintendo refuses to put this game out other than on the virtual console.
Mm-hmm.
But so the composition team heavily relied on something that the Genesis couldn't do at the time, which was sampling music.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the most part, they used like a lot of samples, which is why nothing really on the SNES as far as quality goes really sounds like this. And so I've got my notes here. So here's just a couple of the songs that they ripped off.
Okay.
So Moonside is, and I don't know if you want to put these in side by side or whatever into the show, or if you want to check them out separately.
Sure.
But when you're in Moonside, it is a Rick Ocasek song called Keep On Laughing.
Okay.
And the song that plays inside the cafe or the bar in Moonside is actually just the national anthem.
That's weird. I didn't notice that.
And so as far as the Beatles stuff goes, they ripped off Sgt. Pepper. So the beginning of Sgt. Pepper, you know, when it's just like that, those like really loud drums and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That is the Dungeon Man theme.
Oh, okay.
And then obviously there's one of the battle music is Johnny Be Good.
Right. Yeah, I did notice that. Yeah.
And so that's just a couple of the songs that they were basically ripping off or taking inspiration from. I mean, if you listen to these songs side by side, it's like, oh, you just used those songs.
Yeah, I definitely remember the Johnny Be Good one for sure.
But I mean, that aside, like, there's tons of original music in this game. You know, it's not like the whole soundtrack is somebody else's stuff.
And it, like, whenever you go from area to area in the game, I was consistently like entertained and anticipating like, what the fuck is this next area going to sound like? Because it's not going to sound like the previous one. They don't reuse songs a lot of times, you know, like Pokemon has the same cave song for every cave in the game. Like, I don't feel like Earthbound did that. I might be misremembering, but like I looked on YouTube, the soundtrack is like, it's like 150 tracks long. Like there's a lot of,
I think it's actually a quarter of the space of that cartridge.
It's just music.
And that's one of the development problems that they ran into, was that once they finished the soundtrack, they're like, well, we don't have room for the game. So it was one of those things where they had to really just wait and develop bigger storage for the cartridge. I think when you brought up the prospect of coming on and talking about Earthbound, I just got super excited and was like, I feel like I know a lot about the development history of Earthbound, but I'm still going to look stuff up. And I found something like crazy where somebody had done the math to find out how much memory a strand of DNA can hold in a human body.
Yeah.
And then measured out how much DNA is in a human body, and then figured out how much of Earthbound can fit inside of a human body or something like that. And it was just some crazy, crazy number that like is unfathomable, and it's just crazy to think about how small Earthbound is. I think it's only like 25 megabytes or something like that.
Right.
But it was like one of the largest Super Nintendo cartridges.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy that, this, like I said, the soundtrack there are so many tracks on it. Like I do a lot of looking through soundtracks to find music for these episodes, and Earthbound has one of the biggest or like most tracks of any game that I've covered on the show so far. So I'm not surprised that they had trouble fitting it on a cartridge back in the day.
It's one of those soundtracks that I listen to even if I'm not playing the game. It's just that good.
It is. All right. So we are going to take a little break. We're going to let you listen to a little bit more of that soundtrack. When we come back, we're going to talk about the kind of like writing in Earthbound, which I think is its biggest draw. Okay, so back talking about the kind of writing and humor and charm in Earthbound. And I'll say this ahead of time. I think this is an extremely charming game, but I think charm is if you're trying to be very like professional critic, charm is not very useful, because what's charming for me is maybe not charming for everybody else. But I found this game to be really, really charming. And I kind of buried the lead here, but this was the thing that got me through the game. I like this game, and I like it almost exclusively because of its charm and flavor and atmosphere and writing and the way that characters interact with each other and stuff like that. Like mechanically, I think this game is pretty bad, but I love the writing and I love the humor. I'll get into why I don't like the mechanics of it later. Kind of an early example, the game, it hits you with the charm right from the beginning, that kind of opening, choose your character name screen like Keith talked about. But early in the game, you get a very early example of just how weird this game is going to get. So you get your beginning story exposition from a bee from the future, and its name is Buzz Buzz. And Buzz Buzz travels with you as a member of your party, and Buzz Buzz just crushes every enemy you come up against. Buzz Buzz does like 80 times the damage that Ness does in those opening sections. So you're like, hell yeah, Buzz Buzz is he's going to be part of my team. I'm gonna wreck shop. But you go into Pokey's house as part of the early game story, and Pokey's mom just swats Buzz Buzz and kills him. And so your magical powerhouse bee from the future is dead, and now you're on your own again as Ness. And so from that point in the beginning, I got this like very like, okay, this game is a lot weirder. I knew this game would be weird because it's, we're dealing with an alien invasion here, but this game is going to be weirder than I even expected. So that was my first clue.
Yeah, when I played this game, and every time I play it, I feel like there's something new that I didn't quite understand the last time I played it. And obviously, as a child, when I play this, there's a lot of stuff I didn't understand. But the writing, I mean, this game is it's so referential. That's its main motivation. It's like we were talking about earlier. I mean, there's so much little things that make this kind of like a time capsule, but things are also very relevant today. So you want to talk about like stuff like cults, police brutality, stuff like that. And what JRPGs were at the time were not that. They weren't dealing with real world stuff. It was obviously there's an alien invasion in this game, but also like that's not really upfront, the entire, it's kind of in the background until like the later parts of the game.
Right.
And I think what it does best is there's so much stuff in like pop culture today where the references are almost shoehorned, even if they don't seem to fit exactly what's happening. It doesn't fit the situation or whatever. It's just in there to be like, hey, there's that thing that you like. You like that thing, don't you? Right? You like that?
Yeah.
Whereas like the references in Earthbound, they don't take any time to explain it. It's just, they say it and then it's over with. And I think it just goes to, because this game does a very good job of making you feel like you're going through this world from a child's perspective, because we are dealing with a silent protagonist, which is kind of weird for a JRPG at the time. When we talk about JRPGs, everybody talks about the protagonist for the most part. But this was very much, I guess, taking a little more from stuff like Zelda or like Mario, silent protagonist, really trying to put you in that person's shoes. But I think sometimes just when one of the adults in the world cracks a joke or makes a reference and there's just Ness's vacant face, it kind of makes it work even more than it should. So I don't know, the humor in this game is not shallow. I do not think it's very shallow. You just kind of have to pay attention to what people are saying to you. The best part is that, again, it's not a reference for reference sake. It's just meant for world building. It kind of weaves itself into the narrative and the gameplay as well. Like one of my favorite things is, I forgot what dungeon it's in, but you have to talk to these rocks in one of the caves or whatever. And the rock is just like, hello there, I'm a talking rock. It's just like, well, yeah, but it's like, in every other like JRPG, this rock would have some sort of lore or something. There'd be a reason for it existing. It would take itself so seriously. And Earthbound doesn't do that. There's like a progression element to Earthbound where one of the jokes is there's a pencil blocking your way.
Yeah.
And you have to go find the pencil eraser.
Right.
And you go find the pencil eraser and you erase the pencil, but then later on, that trope comes back, but it's an eraser, so now you have to find the eraser.
Yeah,
instead
exactly.
Earthbound and so it just kind of keeps it just keeps subverting those tropes that you would just see in any other RPG.
Yeah, it is not afraid to get weird in very short bursts. Like you'll go through, you'll talk to some normal people, and then you'll talk to entire characters who are jokes, basically. Like their whole existence is there to be a joke. Like there's this one town where there's two kids who are like rival inventors, and one kid's name is Apple Kid and one kid's name is Orange Kid, and you have these two rival inventors, and another game might just like put those out there, these two kids, but Earthbound is like, hey, just give them weird names that like kind of pit them as opposites, and then that's the joke. They don't dwell on it. They just think like, hey, isn't it funny? And I think it is kind of funny. There's a quote I wrote down. This is really early in the game, and this is another one of those quotes that gave me like this clue, like, okay, hey, Dave, pay attention to what people are saying in this game. Don't just mash through dialogue because there's going to be some interesting stuff. So this is a quote from the mayor early in the game after you help the mayor with something. So the mayor says, hey, I'm Mayor B.H. Perkle. It's so nice to meet you. You beat up the town bullies, punched them out big time, kicked their butts, bit their heads off, spit in their eyes, and made them wet their pants. Then you forced them to promise not to make any more trouble. Thank you. Wait, what? You want a key to the touring entertainer's shack? For someone as great as you, giving you the key could help to keep the town peaceful. However, if you encounter a dangerous situation, please don't ask me to take any responsibility. I'll be able to avoid any responsibility, right? Okay. And then that's the end of that conversation. So in In this one conversation, this is consistent throughout the whole game. People are constantly making jokes, or they're saying things that are like strike a little bit of a real life chord, like the mayor saying like, hey, I'm not responsible for whatever the fuck happens in there.
Right.
You know, exact. So like there is this incredible balance and combination of things that remind you of the way real people think, but also just these incredibly silly and stupid and very funny jokes throughout the entire game.
But it's all, yeah, it goes back to like me talking about how this game really kind of puts you in that child's perspective, in which the adults very much just treat you like a child.
Yeah.
As funny as, and I'm sure we'll get into it after like the spoiler wall, but I mean there are some like more serious things going on in the game as well, that I think contrast the humor really, really well, in a way that it's like that scene in Toy Story 3. I might be spoiling kind of the end of Toy Story 3 here, but where all the toys are like holding hands and they're facing that incinerator or whatever, where it's like a very, very serious moment. And there's stuff like that in this game, and it's like mature and relatable, but it's not like that deep because it's contrasted by all the weird stuff that's in this game, you know?
Yeah. Like there's some stuff really late in the game that are very serious and maybe even touching situations, but 2 hours before that you were literally inside of a person whose one wish it was to become a dungeon, and you were actually inside of him just like an hour and a half before this very touching moment. So yeah, you're right, there is like this contrast, and so the game has like, this is not a super serious game that is setting you up to like, you know, crush you at certain parts the way some games do. Other JRPGs often do. This is
I mean, it could get, there's a part we'll probably talk about later that I think still kind of gets me a little emotional. Kind of has that like something like an indie game might have in it these days, where it's kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, there are some really powerful parts for sure, but it's like I was literally inside of Dungeon Man an hour and a half ago, so that is still in my head a little bit. So yeah. Okay, let's take a little break. When we come back, we're going to talk about actually playing Earthbound, what it's like to actually play. Playing Earthbound, mainly, it is mainly walking around talking to people in JRPG fashion the way you do. However, contrasted with a lot of JRPGs, as we talked about, the writing is very entertaining, and so I actually liked talking to random strangers around town. You know, this is something that bothers me with a lot of JRPGs, where it's like the way to progress or the way to find what you have to do is you have to talk to all the people in the town, but there's going to be 11 people in the town. One of them has the important information for you, and 10 of them just have boring bullshit that they're saying.
Yeah.
So I don't want to talk to people in town, but Earthbound, everyone's entertaining. So I did actually want to see what people are saying. And in Earthbound, there's probably, so let's say there's 11 people in the town. Maybe one of them is the way to progress the plot forward. Two of them have like weird, you know, side things for you to do, even if it's just like, you know, hey, drink this tea that's going to send you on a hallucinogenic journey. Or, you know, someone's going to sell stuff to you that you weren't expecting them to have an item for you or something like that. And then all the other people, they're going to just say some weird shit that's going to be entertaining to read. So I actually do like talking to all the people, which is something that like sometimes I play older JRPGs and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And then the guides will say like, talk to everybody. And I'm like, I don't want to talk to everybody. They don't have anything interesting to say. Earthbound is much, much better in that way.
Yeah, you would be doing yourself a disservice if you were just skipping through the text.
Yeah, it's
You
good.
really would be. Because that's one of the things, aside from the music and the presentation and the graphics and everything else, the writing is what makes this game. And like I said, Ness is a silent protagonist. There's not a whole lot up in that head. And to make Ness seem like a character just based on the people around him is something that cannot be understated. That is, the writing is, it's just, the dialogue is so amazing, and it makes you actually care about the world that you are going off to go save. In so many RPGs, I'm like, all right, here I am. I'm the chosen one. I found the sword and I'm going to go kill God. Like, that's it. Like, I could, like you said, like, I don't like, if I go around town and somebody's just like, oh, somebody poisoned the water today. And it's like,
Yeah,
oh, okay. And
I
then
like
it's like
shorts.
you come back.
They're comfortable and easy to wear.
Yeah. And then you come back 6 hours later and they still say the same thing. And you're like, okay. That's the other thing too. Like, Earthbound changes over time. You know, if you're in, Saturn Valley, if you get to Saturn Valley and you complete that whole quest and then you go back to On It, some of the NPCs will have something different to say.
And especially like much, much later in the game. Actually, I actually want to say this now because I want people to not miss this like I did. After you beat the game, you can go back and talk to everybody, and everybody knows that you've beaten the game. And I think that that's very, very cool. People will like thank you and congratulate you and stuff like that. And I just assumed like most games, okay, I beat the game. I didn't get like this, credits and, go to New Game Plus the way a lot of games do now. It just put me back down. But I just like put it down and I was like, okay, I'm done. But in Earthbound, like you said, people change. They have different dialogue. And the biggest example of that is after you beat the final boss, you should go back and talk to people because they have new things to say. And it's context dependent.
If I may digress just slightly, that's something that many JRPGs don't do, even to this day. They don't let you just kind of, after the game is done, let you exist in that world as it has changed. And there's so many, like Final Fantasy VII, it's my favorite game of all time. I love the way that game ends because it is so open-ended. And there's so many, every time I finish that game, I'm like, I want to live in this world, if only for like a couple more hours. I want to see what's different. I want to go back to Midgar, see how it's changed. And you don't. And it, like, in a way it's great, in a way it sucks. But Earthbound lets you do that. It lets you see what you have accomplished. And games just don't do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that's unique to JRPGs. It's like, I'm struggling to think of any game that, like, a lot of games will let you, like, go finish your side quests after you beat the main story. But a lot of games will just kick you into New Game Plus right away. And there's certainly, like, even a lot of new games where, like, maybe they have the resources to do this. It's not like you're, beating the final boss in, let's say, Horizon Zero Dawn, and then everyone in the world is like, hey, thank you for taking care of that situation. People don't do that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I guess a more modern example, like I just beat Spider-Man for the first time.
Right.
And obviously after the final boss, you can go back into that and just clean up the rest of the game. But it's like nobody seems affected by anything.
Right. So it's just a really cool thing that Earthbound has put into it. So I actually, I was saving that for the spoiler section, but I think it's really cool, and it should be representative of a lot of the like touches that they've put on other parts of the gameplay, not necessarily the the meat and potatoes, which is the combat, going through dungeons and stuff like that. There is care put into other aspects of the gameplay that I think people should know about. Now that I've said all of those nice things, it's time to talk about the it's time to talk about the combat. So first, before combat, you're running around on an overworld, or not an overworld, these map screens, and this is kind of like Chrono Trigger, where you can see the enemies out in the on the screen. It's not like random encounters. So you can see the enemies on the screen.
It's sort of random.
It's random which enemies appear and how many there are. But
Right.
it's not like you stepped on this, you've walked 7 tiles, now it's time for an encounter, like in, Final Fantasy
Right.
games and stuff like that. So you can see the enemies, and this gives you this like choice of how you want to engage them. You can try to avoid them, but it's really, I don't like that. I don't like the execution of that because the enemies are way faster than you. And if you try to run away, they'll just hit you from behind. And this game has this system where if you get hit from behind, or if you hit an enemy from behind, you get an ambush and you start first in combat. So it's good that you can do that, but trying to run away from them will basically always get you this, ambush. What you should do is, this game has this thing where if you go out of that screen and come back, it'll reload enemies. And sometimes, you'll go on the screen and there's like 7 enemies there. And then you go back and come back to that screen and it's like, oh, there's only 1 this time. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. And that's one way to make that a little bit easier. So, yeah. I don't know. Do you like this, how they execute this, like seeing enemies on the screen thing? Because Chrono Trigger does this too, and I think Chrono Trigger's is much better than Earthbound's.
I do like this approach to the enemy encounters. In fact, I like it so much that it, since 1995, has kind of changed my life when approaching enemy encounters in JRPGs, because of the fact that I always try and sneak up behind an enemy thinking I'm going to get the advantage, but it usually never works out that way, which is very strange. Some RPGs will do that. Not many. And I don't know a lot of JRPGs that even implement this kind of system to this day, and I do not know why. It's such a good idea to be able to kind of, I mean, it's so rudimentary in Earthbound, right? I mean, it's a 2D game. You can only do so much. But the fact that you could kind of think of a way to engage an enemy before the battle even happens is a really cool idea. And I mean, yeah, there's a lot of risk reward if you're walking into a room and you're like, all right, do I just take these enemies head on, or do I try and turn around and get them to despawn and kind of roll the dice and see if I can get a better handle on what's going on in this room? It does suck when you fail, because you will die.
Yep.
Especially pretty early on.
Yeah.
And I will say, I mean, this is a 1994-ass JRPG. There's grinding involved, and
Yep.
I can't defend that, even when I've talked about older JRPGs on my own show. I can never defend grinding, other than the fact that if you realize you need to grind, put on a great podcast, put on an awesome album, chill out, and just grind away. It's not terrible in Earthbound. There are so many JRPGs that are much worse than Earthbound.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You have to grind in Earthbound. There are certain points in the game where I was like, I'm not doing a lot of damage. I need to grind a few levels. And in Earthbound, a few levels is usually enough,
Yes.
Like,
yes.
You don't have to grind 15 levels. If you're having a hard time with a boss, go grind like 2 levels, and it will make a big difference. But I agree, it's not as egregious as a lot of other, even classic, critically acclaimed JRPGs.
Yeah, and I think what Hal did to mitigate grinding as well is genius, in which this is another thing I've never seen any other JRPG do. But if you are at a higher level, or you have beaten the boss of the area that you're in, enemies will run away from you.
Yep.
And so it's very easy to get a preemptive strike on them. And instead of going into the battle screen and actually having to go through the whole system of a battle, just right then and there's a flash on the screen and the music comes up and it says you won. It gives you your XP and you're done, which very much helps when it comes to grinding. And there, like a lot of JRPGs, there are certain spots that you can go to get a ton of XP very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like you don't, unless you really just want to be a powerhouse and just fight your way through the game very easily, you don't need to do a ton of grinding. There's even certain points in the game where they use the leveling up system to kind of be like this like metaphysical thing, like you have transcended, and then they will give you like, the game will just give you 5 or 10 levels as kind of like this, as if like you've just overcome like this huge thing and like you're becoming like a better person or something like that.
Yeah, you've like you said, you've transcended, or you have overcome this like very personal challenge or something like that, and then that's reflected in your character's strength. Like you have grown as a character or as a person, like your character Ness has, so it's reflected in his level, the way that not a lot of games do that, even though characters do have these very big like personal successes in the stories of a lot of these games, but you never get a bunch of levels for doing that. But in Earthbound, that does happen sometimes, and it's very cool.
If you're going into this game, here's a little tip for you, and I don't know if you knew about this, Dave, but in the desert, I don't remember what the enemy is called. I think he's just called like the boss caterpillar or the angry caterpillar or something like that. And he gives out a ton of XP, and he will run away from you. So it's very easy to get the drop on him and just win the battle automatically. And like I said, he gives a ton of XP, but if you do somehow mess it up and get into a regular battle, he will fuck you up. So nice. You have to be really careful with that one. So that's just my little pro tip right there.
Nice. I'll be honest with you. I never fought things in the desert because I was scared. So I just didn't fight things in the desert.
He only spawns in like one particular area of the desert. Otherwise, you don't see him.
Yeah, so I never saw that thing. I do want to mention, though, when you get those automatic victories, you get a portion of the regular experience. You don't get 100%. So I think it's overall positive because you don't have to go into battles and stuff like that. You can probably grind quicker this way, but you don't get all of the experience that way. The enemies running away from you is really cool, and yeah, you're right. I haven't seen that in a lot of games. And like I should say, I said I wasn't a huge fan of like the execution of this, but this is still way, 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 way better than the typical JRPG, like random tiles shooting up like random battles at you. I will play this style of thing, and I will enjoy this way more than, the where they set encounter rates based on how many tiles you walk on in Pokemon or in basically every other JRPG I've played. Shit, Pokemon only started doing this like 3 years ago, so like this is really, really good, and I would like to see. I hope that JRPGs now are not made in this way, this like 2D type of way anymore, like AAA ones aren't. But I hope that the indie developers who are making JRPG inspired games will copy this, because I think this is good, and more iteration on this would make it even better. Like the way that the Pokemon Legends Arceus does with its enemies on the map and how they react to you and stuff is really, really good. So people have improved on this, but in Earthbound it's really good. And like we said, this game is, I'm not going to do the math, this game's old as shit. They figured it out to a certain extent way back when, and it's overall I think it's better than the random encounters with enemies you can't see on the screen, for sure. But once you do get into combat, then you have to do combat in Earthbound. You have to do Earthbound combat. So I will say the friendly way of saying this is that the combat is very basic, which is understandable because this game is old. we didn't have 30 years of iteration on turn-based combat back when this game was released. We had, I don't know, I'm not a game historian when we go that far back, but this is old-ass JRPG combat. You have a basic attack with each character. 3 of your 4 characters can use psychic abilities called psi abilities, healing, offensive magic, or status effects. And then your other character, Jeff, has items that he can use in battle. So, and these are all the most American items ever. Jeff is basically shooting fireworks at enemies. And if that's not American, then I don't know what the fuck is.
Probably screeching like an eagle.
Yeah, exactly. While Lee Greenwood is playing.
Cry.
Yeah. So the combat is really, really basic. And I think the combat is really RNG based. Like, enemies in this game hit hard. And even your basic enemies have attacks that will do a lot of damage to you, especially early in the game. Especially, it's kind of like exacerbated by the fact that you just have Ness early in the game. And so, like, if there's an enemy that hits really hard, you want to kill it as quickly as possible, but you only get 1 turn. Later on in the game, you'll be able to manage really hard enemies a lot easier because you have a lot more turns for your side. So early in the game, I found myself really like there's no strategy I found early in the game because your psi attacks use your magic called PP in this game. And yeah, I had to. Recovering PP is really hard. You don't get like any items early in the game that recover it. You have to go all the way back to a hotel and rest to recover, or find a rare event or something that will recover it. So like the only strategy is like, oh, this enemy is really hard, I should use magic against only this enemy. Everything else is just like attack. Oh, I got hit really hard, I gotta heal this time. Okay. All right, next time attack. Oh, the enemy missed. Okay, attack again. It's really like no strategy until way late in the game, I thought. I don't think this combat is even really later in the game. I don't think this combat's very good, and I think it's just because it's really old and outdated. Maybe Keith, you can talk about like back in the day, what did you think?
I'm very going to politely disagree and say that it's not outdated, but also, I mean, if it's very, very Dragon Quest. It's Dragon Quest, just plain and simple. It is just they took Dragon Quest and that is the battle system. It is incredibly simple. Yeah, I don't know if it's outdated because there's so many modern games that are still doing this,
like Dragon Quest.
We can still, yeah, like we can talk about it, like Pokemon.
Yeah,
even in Pokemon Arceus or whatever. Arceus, whatever it's called, still turn-based for the most part. But
not to get into a thing about Pokemon, but there is way more strategy in Pokemon than Earthbound. Even in Pokemon Red.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like I said, it all goes back to that rock, paper, scissors type of mentality. I do agree, though. Like, the first couple of hours of Earthbound is an uphill climb. It is very much, this is a JRPG-ass JRPG. It doesn't really get interesting until you get Paula. Because I think even then, Ness doesn't unlock his psychic powers quite yet. I think Paul is the first one with the psychic powers.
Ness unlocks them like early in the game, but like I said, you can't use them all the time because you have such limited pool of like PP. Yeah. And it's so hard to recover them. You can use like 2 psi attacks and then you can't use any more because you can't recover PP. So
right.
Ness effectively doesn't have them except for in emergencies.
Yeah, it's definitely an uphill battle. And I think I remember you texting me when you started the game and you're like, do I have to grind? Because I think you're having a tough time with Frankie.
Yeah.
And that is your first like test. Be like, can you beat this boss? Because Frankie is hard. And then directly after that battle, you have to fight this like monster that he made of like kegs And
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
like, so it's like a double boss battle, and they will both just wreck you if you are underleveled. And so it's like like I said, there's grinding involved in this game, and that is probably one of the most notorious parts of the game where you will just have to grind.
Yeah. That was the like most noticeable place where I was like, I have to grind right now. Later in the game, I did inadvertently grind a bit as I got stuck in some dungeons and was just going around again and again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
That was effectively grinding. But that early part in the game was really one of the only points where I was like, okay, Dave, yeah, like you said, put on a podcast. It's time to grind for about an hour.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. And I won't defend the early hours of this game at all, as far as the battles go. So let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Did you use the auto mode on this game at all?
No, because I think I tried a few times early in the game, and I very quickly noticed that it was not killing enemies quickly enough. So it was not, it was not the optimal choice for me.
Yeah, in the
So
24 years this game has been out, I have never used that. So
Yeah.
I have no idea why it's in there. I don't remember. There was a podcast I was listening to. I don't remember who it is, so forgive me if they even listen to the show. They said that they used it, and this is something I guess we can kind of get into. They used the auto mode when their player would take a critical hit, and essentially the rolling counter would start going down, because I think they said when you use the auto mode, it automatically prioritizes your healing and will do it much faster than what you can do.
Oh, right, because you have to menu through and choose the right things.
Yeah, so it's like, I'd never, ever thought of that in like the how many years I've played this game. And when I was playing through it for the show, I didn't utilize it because I just never, I don't know, there's something about it where I'm just like, I don't know why this is here. Like,
yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up though, because the one thing that is unique with this game and Mother 3, if I'm remembering correctly, is when you get hit, your hit points don't go down instantly. You have these this rolling health, and it will slowly tick down your health. Not slowly, but it will tick down. And your character, even if you take 500 more damage than you have hit points, it won't kill you instantly. It will tick down, tick, 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 and you can still attack. You can still do stuff during that time. And early in the game, this wasn't very useful. It was just kind of like, oh, that's nice. I was able to attack one more time and kill this enemy.
There are instances where you will just finish the battle before your health hits 0, and you are just left with wherever the counter stopped at the end of the battle.
Right. Later in the game, though, this became like something that I could rely on, and like I had to rely on because enemies hit so hard. But I feel like it was designed with the idea that, okay, later in the game, you have managed this, you have like kind of mastered this is one of my criticisms. Later in the game, I think there's like, each character has like one good move, like one optimal move. You're not really fucking around with a lot of the status effects and stuff in most of the fights. So,
I mean, they very much become your traditional, like, one's a thief, one's a bard or whatever, one's the white mage,
right?
One's the knight. They fall into those traditional JRPG tropes.
Right. So, like, later in the game, I still don't think there's a lot of strategy with the moves that you have later in the game, but what the strategy does, where the strategy does kick in is with this rolling health, because enemies hit really hard, and you have to know what to do when your health is rolling down like that. And I do think that is kind of cool. I don't love it, but I think it's kind of cool. It's unique, and it does give you this like, oh shit, Jeff just took a really big hit. I got to take care of that right now. And this game is turn-based, but that health is ticking down in real time. So it's like, oh, hurry up, hurry, take care of Jeff, like that. So that is a kind of cool mechanic in the combat. One other thing you mentioned, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on this. I thought it was kind of cool that for most of the game, Ness is not the most powerful character in your party, as your player character is, often, this super soldier or something like that, thinking of Final Fantasy VII or something. I found Paula to be like by far the most effective character for like 95% of the game.
I mean, yeah. I don't want to really go into it, but I mean, even going up until the end of the game, I mean, it's Paula, right? So, yeah, I feel like this is kind of Paula's game in a lot of ways, and I think that's only from a story standpoint. When you meet Paula, I mean, she's kidnapped. She's going through all this stuff. It seems like she's kind of lived life a little bit more than Ness has.
Yeah.
Or Ness just kind of seems like he's kind of had this kind of sheltered upbringing almost, or whatever. Like,
yeah, Ness
like
has just been playing baseball in his backyard the whole time,
Yeah, it seems like almost kind of like a latchkey kid sort of, or something, like.
Mm-hmm.
And all these other people, I mean, when you meet Jeff, he's already seems like he has like this entire life. He's at this boarding school, and then Pooh, I'm not even gonna like pretend like Pooh is useless. I don't actually really know why. He's just another psychic person. I don't know why he's there, to be honest. But
yeah,
I mean, he does get some very powerful attacks, but it takes a long time. Did you get did you get everybody's secret weapon?
No, because this has one of this old I don't know, old fashioned game design things where it's like, you have to fight this one enemy, and this enemy has a 1 in 128 chance of dropping Pooh's special weapon. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, I am never fucking doing that. That's horrible.
And it's the only weapon in the game for him.
Yeah. So you're right. So since I didn't do that, and by the way, I don't think that that's my fault for not doing that. I think it's a shitty way to make a character useful.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Pooh has a good attack, but it takes a lot of PP, and he doesn't have he doesn't have a huge pool of it. And so the rest of the time I was like, yeah, Pooh, you just kind of chip in some damage, and if you get hit with an attack, cool, because that means they didn't hit Paula,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, but plus I mean, like I said, she's your white mage, Ness gets some healing spells.
Oh, interesting.
But
I used Ness for healing mostly. I used Paula like exclusively for damage, and then Ness was the healer. And Ness would use.
See, I always use them interchangeably. So if Paula was hitting hard, Ness was healing, and then if somebody got like mortal damage or something, I would automatically switch to Paula because I knew she had the better healing spell anyway. And so then I would let Ness hit, and then Paula would heal anybody who really needs to get their HP up or whatever. So I basically kind of switched off with both of those guys.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. Like I kind of quickly figured out Paula's attacks hit hardest, and for most of the game, Ness doesn't have enough PP. Paula gets way more than Ness. So Paula would hit really hard. I would use Ness to heal. Ness is like, hit with the bat attack. That's like basically just the free attack is better than Paula's free attack. So I would use him that way. Jeff is pretty interesting, but I don't know. He gets one item later in the game that's like a reusable like rocket launcher, and I just use that all the time, except on bosses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, not to get too deep into go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the other thing that I never quite liked about this game is it has, each weapon has its own stats that relates to your character depending on what you equip. And the one thing I just hated was just how good like stuff like the yo-yos were, but its effectiveness was like next to nothing. You were probably going to miss half of your shots at an enemy.
Yeah.
That's one of those things that I just especially in older JRPGs, is just shitty because they will always they'll screw you. The odds are always stacked against you in situations like that. And this game is kind of filled with those weapons.
Yeah, and as you're playing the game, you pick up a new weapon. Because like in Earthbound, you can't see the stats of your weapon. You can't see that, I picked up this super laser or whatever. You can't see that it only hits 35% of the time, and your automatic instinct is to equip your new weapon, your new shiny weapon, and this is going to be a good transition. Your other instinct is to get rid of your old weapon because you have limited inventory space in Earthbound, and it's fucking horrible. It's by far the worst part of this game. It made me so mad consistently through the game. So because you have limited inventory space, you'll get a new weapon. You'll sell your old weapon immediately, or at least you'll get it out of your inventory. Then you'll go into a dungeon. You'll find out your shiny new weapon only hits 30% of the time, and you're like, well, fuck. I guess I gotta go back and buy something else. Anyway, inventory space. Your inventory can only hold 10 items, I think, and those items include your weapon, your 3 equipable like armor and item slots, accessory slots, which you should have filled up on everybody so they don't die in one hit. And then all your key items. So your ATM card where you can take out money, your map, and the sound stone, which is a mandatory item in Ness's inventory, which you're using to collect these melodies. If you throw in a few other items like the pencil eraser we talked about earlier, suddenly you only have 2 slots for consumable things like health restoratives and stuff like that. Early in the game, when you just have Ness, and like I said, you only have Ness for maybe at least a couple hours, this inventory limit is awful. I hated it so much. It made the game way harder than it should have been. It gets a little bit better as you get more party members, but it's still bad because Jeff needs to use items in combat to be useful at all. So Jeff's inventory is basically full the whole game with bottle rockets and stuff like that.
That's what I was going to mention that.
Yeah. So what this does is every time you pick up an item, you need to do inventory management, because if you're like me, your inventory is basically full as you're walking around in dungeons. Especially, you need to fill up on healing stuff or useful items in combat itself. So every time you find a treasure in a dungeon, you're like, okay, this looks cool. Well, I have to throw away a healing item to take this with me. It's real bad, and you can't just like drop quest items after the quest is over. You have to call the Escargot Express to come pick it up, and they can only they can only like take 3 things at a time, so you have to call them repeatedly. That's not a huge deal. The big deal is that you're limited in your inventory, and I feel like the inventory limit is not big enough. It's really bad.
Yeah. No, that's the one thing I will definitely be like, yes, this absolutely sucks. There's no reason that this needs to be like this.
Yeah.
There's
no reason at all.
So many games.
Final Fantasy games let you carry 99 of any item you want, and 99 of 99 different items. Like,
if I buy 7 skip sandwiches, let them stack. Why don't they stack? But no, instead,
the items
7...
don't stack. That's the problem. If the items stacked, it wouldn't be a huge deal, but they don't.
Right. No, yeah, it's downright awful. I have no idea. And I think the only thing that I could come to this defense, and I would still hate it because personally I don't give a shit, is that they're probably going for realism. These are kids. They can only fit so much stuff in their little backpacks or their pockets or purse or whatever might have you, which is something people like realism in video games, Dave. People like their weapons to break in Breath of the Wild, and it's the best game that was ever made. People love that shit. They eat it up, and that's the only defense. It's a terrible defense, I know.
Yeah.
But it sucks.
Because this isn't realism because you're carrying, Jeff is carrying a fucking rocket launcher in his backpack. If you're talking about realism, like, there's no realism there. So, like, I get, like, if you want to have inventory management, you have to make it, don't let it get in the way of fun in the game, I think. Like, encumbrance is a way that a lot of games do this, where your inventory is limited because you can only carry a certain amount of stuff. Or I have seen Resident Evil games do that, like inventory Tetris, right?
Oh man, Resident Evil 4 is like the best as far as inventory management goes.
That's way more interesting than just like you get to carry 10 items and only 10 items. I think this is horrible. The other problem with this is like you get these quest items, and I was always afraid to get rid of them or send them back to the computer because you never know when you're going to come up on one of those pencils out in the world.
Yeah.
Or you never know when, like, I thought you get this item called the Franklin badge early in the game that reflects electricity, and you use it for one of the main quests. And I thought, okay, that's over. I'll put the Franklin badge away forever. Nope. The Franklin badge is useful the entire game. You should pretty much always keep the Franklin badge. But because you're so pressured by the amount of items you can carry, you're constantly trying to get rid of all these quest items, and it will burn you a few times later in the game. So, yeah, this sucks. I don't have anything else to say about it. It's bad.
And I think one of the things that would have helped mitigate stuff like the Franklin badge is to have what a lot of JRPGs typically have, which Earthbound doesn't, if you had like equipable armor, basically.
Yeah.
So maybe, Ness equips a shirt that has that bonus to deflect electricity or something like that.
Right.
So then you're not taking up another part of your inventory. That's a whole separate screen from your actual inventory.
Yeah, you get accessories in Earthbound that like could theoretically do that, but they don't have the same function. A lot of them just add to your defense rating, and some of them will be like, you can't get put to sleep if you're wearing this. None of them will have that. The Franklin badge should be an equipable accessory. At the very least, let's free up one inventory slot by making this your accessory equipable. But it's not. It's just a thing you have in your inventory that then has that effect.
So let me ask you something here about still on the battles, I guess. I'm really interested to hear what you thought about homesickness.
Homesickness?
When Ness would get homesick?
I don't think that ever happened to me.
Really?
Yeah. It doesn't ring a bell at all. What happens when you get homesick?
So what homesickness is it's essentially just a status ailment that will come up when it just randomly comes up. You will be in a battle and it'll just be like, oh, Ness doesn't feel like fighting right now. Or like, Ness is, thinking about pussy back home. And, and like Ness will just refuse to fight. And
Weird.
The only way to relieve that status ailment is to actually just make a phone call home and talk to your mom.
Oh. Okay.
That never came up for you?
No, never. Not once.
Wow. That comes up, not frequently, but it comes up a couple times in the game. At least for me, it did.
Interesting. I never had that. Like, I can't even I don't even know if I called mom that often. It was, let's see.
I don't know. I think it's a really interesting mechanic, especially in relation to the story, because it's one of those things that kind of really make you think about how far you've actually come in your journey, because it really doesn't start happening until you're probably after you get Jeff. And I guess maybe it speaks to me too, because for someone like me, it makes me dwell on all the stuff I've done in my life, and people get homesick. It's that kind of stuff that when you're in bed at night and you wake up in the middle of the night, you're having an existential crisis or something, and it's like, those thoughts don't really mean anything, but could kind of bring your mood down the very next day or whatever while you're at work or something. And it's just like, you want to talk to somebody familiar. You want to call home just to get like some sort of reassurance, even if it doesn't really mean anything at all.
Right.
And I know like I sounded like hypocritical when I talked about the inventory space being realistic, when in reality, I think I talked about how Earthbound really kind of pokes fun at JRPGs a lot. And it's very self-aware.
Mm-hmm. It does.
But in a way, like, the homesickness thing is kind of like a hint of realism in a video game, and like I said, it's just one of those things where it's just like, you got to remember, like, these are just children.
Right.
Like,
that's what I was going to say.
They have like this huge burden on their shoulders, and it's like, I don't know. I did one of the weird things too, where it's like, once you get the ability to teleport or fast travel, it was one of those things like when I played this as a kid for no reason at all, I would just teleport myself to Nessa's house and go talk to my mom there instead of calling her, even though it actually didn't really do anything special. It was just, I was just a weird kid, and that's what I did. So, but yeah, it's interesting you never came across that, because I feel like this would have been a Dave thing that you would have just hated.
No, it probably would have been annoying if it just like sprung up at a bad time in combat, but I really like the idea of it. Like,
you get no warning to when it's going to happen. It just happens.
Right. And so I think it would have been a pretty cool reminder, because you're right. You do forget as you play through the game, you forget that Ness is a small child. And so it would have been a pretty cool reminder, I think, that this is a group of kids you're dealing with here. And they didn't just stop being kids because they're out doing this, save the world adventure here. So that is pretty cool, but it never happened. And I wonder if, like, when I was using the phone to like call your dad to save, I think.
Yeah, and he also gives you money as well.
Right. He's
like your ATM basically.
Yeah, he puts money in your account. You can also call your mom, and I wonder if, like, from time to time as I was mashing through the phone menu, if I had just accidentally hit call mom, and I wonder if that like staves off homesickness for some amount of time. Yeah.
It must, yeah.
Because, that legit never happened the whole time. And I never went back to the hometown until the end of the game, basically. Or until, the end of the game when you have to go back to the meteor site. So, do you have any other mechanical things that you want to mention before we get into our, like, kind of thoughts in summary before the spoiler section?
No, but do you have a favorite enemy?
No, not really.
Okay.
I thought a lot of the enemies were cool and creative with like what they're made, like what they, how the enemies manifest themselves, like especially the human enemies that you're fighting. You're not fighting just like, mafia goons or something like that. It's corrupted people a lot of times and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty cool. I like the Starmen. The Starmen are a kind of iconic thing. I thought they were pretty cool.
The different versions of them are cool.
Yeah, and some of them will fuck you up.
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
What about you? What's your favorite?
Man, I mean, when you're in Moonside, I think it's Moonside, and you just fight a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
I just think it's just fucking, it's so weird. There's just so many. That's the thing about Earthbound. They have memorable enemies, whereas like a lot of JRPGs at the time are just like, here's the first area and you are fighting a rat, and now you're fighting generic demons or something. Like the escalation's always the same. Like I think like Final Fantasy has like those, I guess, iconic enemies. I wouldn't call them memorable. So like behemoths or bombs or something.
Right.
I don't think those are memorable because they just are in every Final Fantasy.
Right.
So that way it's a little different. But like like you're fighting cops in this game, or you're fighting a pile of puke,
Yeah.
or you're sentient UFOs, and like I think I mentioned the hippie. You're fighting hippies and
Yeah, Sasquatches and stuff like
right,
that.
yeah. I think the one of my favorite enemies is the oak. When you are on your way to Saturn Valley, there's those fucking trees, and they just look so happy, and then they self-destruct and just body your entire party.
Yeah.
It's just so like, oh god damn it. Like every time those things show up on the screen, I'm doing the thing where like you walk away just a little bit and then come back just to make sure that motherfucker's gone. But I just think it's hilarious just how seemingly innocent they look, and then they completely wreck you.
Like there's there's a couple later in the game when like there's one enemy that's just like a gas pump, and it'll show up with other enemies, and it will just constantly like do a full heal on the other enemies. So like in those encounters, it's like, okay, got to kill that fucking gas pump, then I'll deal with this other thing that's really dangerous. So yeah, it's a real mix of enemies from, you know, some traditional RPG type enemies, but you get household objects fighting you. You get, you know, cups of coffee, zombies, corrupted people, and then later in the game you get into all this like cosmic, you know, starmen, UFOs, stuff like that. So cool. Let's take a little break. When we come back, we're going to give our thoughts in summary about Earthbound before the spoiler section. All right, so time for final thoughts in summary. Do we recommend people play Earthbound and stuff like that? Guest always goes first. So, Keith, what do you want people to know who maybe haven't played Earthbound? Or just your thoughts in summary for those who have?
Oh, man. Well, it's tough. Like, this is the first time. This is also the one thing I was kind of anxious about coming on talking about this, is the fact that it's the first time I actually took a real critical look at this game. And it scared the shit out of me. When it comes to my podcast specifically, like a game like this that I'm so familiar with and love so much, which I'm probably kind of giving away what I'm about to say, it has yet to come up on my own podcast, so it's kind of weird to actually critically take a look at this game. Because like when I analyze a game while I'm playing it, I take everything into context. You know, what was gaming like in 1994? How did this game get compared to everything else back then? What was the reception to it? What is it now? And does it have some sort of lasting legacy? And I think Earthbound, looking back at it, is a game that was way ahead of its time in a lot of ways. The approach Hal took to those enemy encounters that we talked about, the focus on the game's characters, and not even the main protagonist. It's the side characters that actually give the protagonist their own identity. The storytelling and the setting is still, you know, something that we don't really see a lot of today. And if we do see it, it's not really done correctly. Like there's JRPGs that try to have like a contemporary setting, but you're still equipping some really strange looking armor, or your character's still using like a Masamune or something. And it's just crazy because like without even leaving Japan and not even talking about the writing, but the setting as a whole, like it's almost like a toy not only held up a mirror to kind of what American post-World War II, like American culture was, but also kind of like what that kind of weird world would look like to a child. And so I think what Earthbound does best is it just wraps its very JRPG, like, go kill God plot very recognizable just by how grounded it is and how emotional it can get. I know we haven't really talked about that stuff really, but there are like some very real like human emotions in this game, and it doesn't, at the same time, it doesn't take itself so seriously because, like I said, this game kind of realizes that it is a video game. And I think in a lot of ways, the story is relatable because if you have a child, well, not even if you have a child, like, we've all been children. Besides dying, that's the only other thing we all have in common as humans, is that we were once children. There's a lot of things that we didn't quite understand, and there's a lot of things in this game that, even as an adult, kind of flies over my head sometimes. So, yeah, it just what it does to just kind of parody the JRPGs that were out at the time. There really isn't really a game that I have played that kind of really balances like this childlike wonder, but also like that dark existential dread that this game has, quite like Earthbound does. And I kind of want, so like there's like a new genre of horror within like the past 6 or 7 years called elevated horror, and I feel like Earthbound would kind of be like an elevated RPG because it takes all those elements that came before and just ramps up the drama, and it just makes that stuff work to its advantage. And what I alluded to earlier is, I think you look at the RPGs coming out today, and I don't think you have games. You definitely don't have games like Undertale. You don't have Octopath Traveler. You don't have Eastward or Lisa. And there was even an article I read earlier today that Trey Parker said that Earthbound was a huge inspiration when making The Stick of Truth. And you could, I mean,
it's pretty easy to see, yeah.
Yeah, look at what South Park actually is. It's for children. So I think if Earthbound came out today with maybe some slight adjustments to the battle mechanics and the inventory, I mean, I don't think, if it came out today, it would be hard to believe that it wouldn't be making Game of the Year lists all over again. And it even, fans petitioning in the early 2000s to have Nintendo put this game back out again, it led to the development of Mother 3, which a lot of people would say is better than Earthbound, which that might be for a whole other podcast. I don't know. But,
yeah.
Yeah, man, I fucking love Earthbound. I would definitely recommend checking it out if you can. Especially if you're interested in playing one of the best JRPGs from that era. It's very, very easy to get into.
Yeah. So, unlike you, Keith, and unlike what you do on the main quest, on my show, I don't often take historical context into account when I'm talking about like my experience with a game and whether I'm going to recommend it. What games were like at the time is not really a factor for me, and it's actually one of my least favorite defenses for a game. And I'm not saying you're defending anything with that. I'm just saying like that's a part of your show and your analysis of it, right? A lot of times, like I'll say I don't like this about a game, and people are like, "Oh, that's just how games were. Suck it up." That's not how I like to look at games.
That's why I wanted to bring up all those modern examples.
Yeah,
where it's like this game still does hold up because those games are incredibly popular today.
Right. Exactly. So, like,
in my opinion, that's
yeah,
just me, obviously.
And I haven't played a lot of those games, but I was thinking, like, before we recorded, like, I was thinking I haven't played Undertale, but I can see the influence of Earthbound in something like Undertale just from what I know about it.
The creator of Undertale, Toby Fox, literally probably would have never made Undertale without Earthbound because he's famous for making the ROM hack for Earthbound. He made a Halloween ROM hack for that, which is apparently like a very good ROM hack. I really want to play that thing.
I would assume it's good because so many people respect Toby Fox as a game designer, so I would assume that his ROM hack is also good.
Yeah, it was one of the very first things that he made, so...
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, so as far as Earthbound goes, since I don't really take what games were like at the time as part of like my experience with it, I am not sure that I would recommend that the average person play Earthbound, except if you're the type of person who charm and atmosphere and writing and stuff like that can carry you through. Like me, that is what carried me through playing Earthbound, because, like I said earlier, I don't think the battle mechanics are very good, even compared to contemporary JRPGs, like JRPGs of the time. Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger both have battle systems that I think are like way better than Earthbound's combat. So, like, from a gameplay perspective, I'm not sure I would recommend people play Earthbound. If you're the type of person that needs really good gameplay to get you through a game, Earthbound, in my opinion, is not going to give you that. But what it will give you is charm, atmosphere, great writing, good characters, and a story. Like, we didn't talk about like the overall story a whole lot, but I think that like that story itself it's kind of built on references and jokes and things like that until you get to the end when, holy shit, the story is actually doing something here. Whereas, like, a Final Fantasy story or Chrono Trigger might be built on this emotional beat after emotional beat after emotional beat. Earthbound is not really like that. It's built on jokes upon jokes upon jokes, and then here's an emotional beat, and then here's more jokes, and then you get later in the story, and they do get to some very cool emotional stuff later. So if you're somebody who, like, that kind of thing can take you through a game with, like I said, good writing, very good atmosphere, good references, a lot of charm and a lot of heart put into the game. You can tell that the people who made this game had a vision for how they wanted it to be. They put everything they had into making it that way. If that can take you through the game, then I think you should play. Actually, and I also think that anyone who wants to kind of take a trip through the history of gaming, I think Earthbound is a stop on that tour that you should take. But I just don't know how many people are going to actually make it to the end of Earthbound, because I think mechanically it's just so, I don't even want to say outdated, because some games that came out at the same time I think are way, way better mechanically. I think Earthbound is pretty bad in a lot of mechanical ways.
So the only thing I want to push back on is because the one thing I could say very easily and be like, well, look at Pokemon.
Yeah.
That game sells gangbusters, and they have not changed anything up until last month. For 25 years.
I'll push back on that, because Pokemon has not changed the core thing, but there's been so much quality of life introduced. However, I will agree with you that Pokemon Red and Blue, if you go back and play those today, they are...
But if we're talking about pure battle mechanics, it is very much a distilled rock, paper, scissors. If you're using water against electric or electric against water, however that works, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's very... you're just going to fly through the game. It's the same thing. Attack, use Thunderbolt, win the game. It's incredibly simple, and that is what Earthbound is. So I'll use Final Fantasy VI. I think you mentioned that, and that came out the exact same year as Earthbound.
Yeah.
You have the Esper system. You have relics. You have custom moves that you can add to your characters. You have basically what amounts to like QTEs in battles for like what they considered limit breaks and stuff like that. You have this very robust system, which I will say is incredibly good, but I don't know how your approach exactly is with your show when recommending stuff, but for me, I'm usually recommending games based on people who are probably new to the genre of the game that I am talking about. And so with Earthbound, like I think I said, it's incredibly approachable to somebody who hasn't played it before. I think somebody who goes to something like Final Fantasy VI and they've never played a JRPG before are going to be like, what the fuck is happening? Especially when it comes down to localization, because so much of that stuff is not explained very well in a lot of those games.
I don't know, man. Final Fantasy VI was my first JRPG other than Pokemon. Final Fantasy VI was my first, and I didn't have I definitely wasn't confused by what was going on. I don't think people will get confused in Earthbound, but yeah, I just don't think mechanically this is something I'm going to recommend to. I'm not going to recommend this to someone as their first JRPG, and I'm not going to recommend this to someone who is like, I need.
Would you
my
ever
JRPGs.
recommend Pokemon as somebody's first JRPG?
Pokemon's like not. When I think of JRPGs, I almost don't even think of Pokemon because they're so off to the side doing their own thing compared to what a lot of other games do. So, like, I would recommend
a JRPG.
I would recommend like Final Fantasy X or Persona 5 or something as their first JRPG. And then they'll take the rest of their life to play Persona 5, and then I'll never talk to them again. But anyway, like, the point I'm trying to get at is, like, I think the people I'm going to recommend Earthbound to are people who can suffer through what I think are bad mechanical things in a lot of ways, or just really old mechanical things in a lot of ways. If you can suffer through that because a good story with a good cast of characters and like fantastic writing can pull you through, I'll recommend it to you. I'll recommend it to other people who are like, I've heard so much about Earthbound, it's clearly a big part of gaming history. I will recommend it to you. Go check it out. If that's the kind of, if you feel like you want to play all of these, you know, major things throughout gaming history. But for people who are like, I really like the battle system in Final Fantasy X, and I love the battle system. I love Persona 5 because it has a great battle system, and I love Chrono Trigger because it has an interesting battle system. Then I don't know if Earthbound is going to be for those people. And this is one of the first games on the show where I have to make all these qualifiers for who I'm going to recommend this game to, other than like, you know, I'm not going to recommend Bloodborne to everybody, even though I think it's a really great game. Earthbound is one of the first games where I have a lot of qualifiers for who I would recommend this to.
I get what you're saying, because when I talked about a game that came out last year, Eastward, I've talked about it on my show.
Yeah.
And that is a game that plays terribly. Like, everything about that game, the combat is awful. But similar to you in Earthbound, what drove me through that game was the character, graphics, music, everything else around that. It was not the combat. The combat sucked. So
yeah.
I
That's
totally get what you're coming from.
Yeah,
I get it.
That's kind of how I feel here. So like, I'll be honest. If I was just playing this for my own enjoyment without the promise of doing a podcast with you, Keith, or if I wasn't playing emulated with the benefit of save states, I can say confidently I would not have finished this game. I would have gotten the flavor of the first couple of cities. I maybe would have made it to the point where you get Paula, but maybe not. Yeah, I wouldn't have finished this without either of those components, and probably a combination of both. That being said, I'm glad I did see the end, because we'll get into in the spoilers section. I think there's some really cool stuff later in the game that would have been a shame for me to miss it. So that's kind of my final thoughts. I am looking forward to replaying and like trying to finish Mother 3. I've started it twice. This time I have some actual hardware to play it on and not some shitty, iPhone, Game Boy Advance, illegal emulator, So
Did you ever play did you play Mother?
No, never.
You want to talk about an aged video game.
I was going to say, yeah, I have a feeling that
fucking rough.
I should just let that one lie,
I dropped Mother for all the right reasons, and I dropped Mother 3 because I was just an idiot. So
yeah,
I want to go back to Mother 3 eventually.
Same. So, before we get into spoilers, one more time, Keith, can you tell people where they can find the Main Quest podcast other than in my show notes?
Well, that basically defeats my whole rant here at the end. So whatever you're listening to this podcast on, you can find my podcast there as well. And if it is not there, you can email me at mainquestpod@gmail.com. You can shoot me a message on my Instagram account where I'm the most active. It will probably take me like a day or two to see that email if you send me one, but I will see it. Otherwise, yeah, you can contact me on Instagram. That is the main quest. And I actually post a lot of stuff relating to the show on there. You can see what's coming up on the show. I post the schedule pretty regularly, and a little bit of other just gaming related stuff. My Twitter is a dumpster fire, but if you want to go check that out, that is at _main quest.
Twitter's a dumpster fire for everybody, so
yeah.
No worries if yours is as well. Yeah, so I think that everybody should go check out the Main Quest podcast. It is one of the podcasts that every new episode I check out basically day and date. One of the few podcasts, this is a big compliment for you, Keith. One of the few podcasts that I will listen to, even if I've never played the game or heard of it before. I have a big problem where if someone's like, this episode, we're going to talk about Final Fantasy II. And I'm like, I'm not going to listen to that. It's just really hard for me to get connected, if I haven't played that game. Sure. But I do like listening to the Main Quest, no matter what game you're talking about.
That means a lot, dude. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good. So everyone go check that out. And I can't wait until you get into some more current games. You can start talking about some actual good games, Keith.
If a good game comes across, man, I will play it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, I can't wait for you to get to the N64 generation because, in my opinion, did you have an N64 even?
Yeah, I thought we were going to talk about good games that I'm going to talk about.
Ooh, okay. In my opinion, a lot of our favorite N64 games have aged horribly, so I can't wait for you to experience that.
Shout out, I guess, on your show, Chris Copeland from Retro Hangover, who says N64 graphics looks like somebody just took Vaseline and smeared it all over the screen. It's exactly what those games look like.
Yep. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the spoiler section. If you're going to tap out now because you don't want spoilers for Earthbound, we've already given you a long look at Earthbound. But if you're going to tap out now, thank you for listening thus far. And if you would like to support Tales from the Backlog, please subscribe on your platform of choice, leave ratings and reviews. Ratings and reviews, emphasis on, because those are helpful. And spread the good word. Tell people about the show. I would appreciate that. Find me on social media. Talk to me about Earthbound or any other game that I am covering on the show. You can find all of my links in the show notes as well. I also do a podcast called A Top 3 Podcast, where each episode, my friends and I pick a topic, and we give our top threes in that topic. That show's a good time. We talk about video games sometimes, but most of the time it's about other stuff. You want to hear me talk about something that's not video games. Go check that out. I swear I have other things I can talk about.
I'm just cracking up because, it's if you guys listen to the show and you don't listen to a top 3, you definitely should check that out. It's hilarious.
It's a good time. So check that out. The top 3 stuff is also in the show notes if you want to check that out, but you can find it on any of the podcast platforms as well. So we are going to take a break. When we come back, it is spoiler time. We're going to talk about mostly story stuff for Earthbound. All right, I am back with Keith. We're talking about spoilers for Earthbound, and we already talked about a few of the kind of notable encounters. We talked about Frankie and how I was like, oh no, I have to grind here. So we already talked about that. So I guess I don't know, just some before we get to talking about Gigas and stuff like that. I thought the what are they called? The Runaway Five every section with the Runaway Five was very funny. How they just keep getting themselves into these like horrible situations with like terrible theater management and all of this debt, and then like I don't know, riding the bus with them playing the song to scare away the ghosts and stuff like that. It was just another one of those, like, they just seemingly have an endless pool of references to pull from and make something entertaining in the game. And the Runaway Five was really, really cool. I really like them.
Yeah, they're definitely one of, I guess, like some of the best characters in the game. And you encounter them so frequently within the journey that they're just kind of like this constant it's one of those things that this game does. It's just this constant reminder of where you came from, how far you've come. I will say though, I don't know how you feel about this, and maybe this is just indicative to how much I've actually played this game.
Yeah.
I hate having to watch that show every single time.
Yeah, I hate it. I watched it the first time, and then the second time it was playing while I was looking at my phone, you know.
Yeah, I definitely just wanted to skip. It's the same thing with the performance that Venus does. It's just, I just want to skip it every time. And it's not even like on a technical basis that great. Even like the opera part in Final Fantasy VI was kind of like this huge technical moment for the sound chip and everything like that they did with that. But even like going back to that doesn't even sound good anymore. Yeah, I don't know. That's just one of the more annoying things that I'm just like, they should have made an option for you just to be able to skip this, you know?
That's an issue with a lot of games in general, especially older games where they're like, no, you can't skip any of this. This is, we spent like a year and a half of our lives putting together this Runaway Five scene. You are not skipping it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But yeah, and then just the way, like, I mean, I can hear the music playing in my head right now, like when you get on that tour bus and you're driving past the ghosts in the tunnel or whatever. They're one of the best characters in the game. I think Venus was kind of it's kind of a rehash of that, like kind of unnecessary, because she oh wait, no, I'm thinking about something else that happens in Moonside, where you have to track down like this alien that's basically like this lady or whatever. There's so as far as Earthbound goes, I think it's easy to separate it into kind of like two different like moods, because there's pre-Moonside, which is kind of like this very grounded story with like some elements of sci-fi in there or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's like post-Moonside, when everything just becomes like this existential, like weird sci-fi crap where you're trying to deal with like your inner self. It just really goes super off the rails after everything that happens in Moonside. And the fact that you like go into like this prehistoric land and your characters are only like 2 pixels tall or whatever.
Yeah, that was really cool. Like when that happened, like again, being in there and walking around and like fighting the dinosaurs wasn't very fun for me, but like
no.
being in there and seeing how they changed it, so like they made your characters so tiny, I was like, I don't know, I just got like this very lizard brain, like that's cool, you know.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Was there a point in this game where you just hit a mark or story beat where you're just like, feel like I'm done with this game? Like it was there a point where you're thinking like, this is too long?
I do think this game's too long. Yeah. But I can't really pin it on like one specific story beat, because I like all the story that you get at all of these parts, especially when you get like kind of halfway through the game and Pokey starts being an asshole again. And so like I enjoyed that. So I don't know, I can't really pinpoint one thing, but I can say definitively if you had to get 5 music tracks instead of 8, it would have been a little bit more enjoyable. I just think a
Yeah.
lot of games are too long, and I do think there's a lot of stuff in Earthbound that like it's cool in the moment, but if you cut it out of the game, I don't think it would be a worse game because of it.
Yeah, I feel like that point always hits for me around like what is it called? Tenda Village, which is I think right before or after the dinosaur area.
Uh-huh.
Um
Yeah.
I think it's right after Deep Darkness, the swamp area or whatever.
Mhm.
And I feel like the Tendas are just kind of like more of Mr. Saturn almost in a way. They do
Yeah,
have their own personality and stuff like that, but I don't know. It's every time I reach that part of the game, I'm just like, oh yeah, okay. This
yeah.
part.
I'll tell you where the game started to drag for me is in the basically I think a lot of the dungeons in the back half of the game really suck. Like the gold mine is I think I texted you when I was like really mad about this. I think the gold mine is a horrible like the encounters specifically. That's the one where you have to go through and you have to fight I think it's 5 mole mini bosses,
Yeah.
and just the fact that the enemies respawn as soon as you leave their screen. The enemies are kind of hard. I got stuck so badly in this dungeon that I think I like over leveled by the end of it. And they give you a helper. They give you the exit mouse in the middle of that dungeon.
Right.
But earlier in the game, I had picked up an exit mouse, found it to be totally useless, so I left it somewhere. I think I sent it away with Escargot Express. So then when you talk to the mother mouse in the gold mine, she's like, take one of my children, he'll help you. And I was like, yes, please give me one of your children. And then she was like, oh, you already took one. Sorry, nope, you can't have one. So I was just like, okay, I guess I'm boned in here. So like there were just several times when I would like, they were basically grinding missions through that gold mine where I would drag my ass to one of those moles, kill it, then drag my ass out of the dungeon to heal. And I'm so glad they don't respawn. Like, I'm so glad you don't have to fight all 5 of them in one go. But it was horrible as is. And then, like, a lot of the other dungeons I just didn't think were very fun.
They're very basic. When you talk about like the contemporary stuff that was out at the time, they're very rudimentary. Like when you even talking about like the battle mechanics of this game, again, a lot of Earthbound is what came before it and then just distilling it down in the simplest form. And unfortunately, yeah, so some of those dungeons are definitely not the worst that I've played as far as retro games go, but yeah, they can, especially the gold mine. When you were texting me that, I was like, I don't know, because I can't relate anymore because I've played it so much that I'm just like, I know exactly where to go and what to do, but
right.
Yeah, I definitely know. Yeah, it's a rough part of the game for sure if you're coming into it blind.
Yeah. Is it Moonside that I forget the name when the big city goes Bizarro World? That's Moonside, yep. Right? Yeah. Yep. I thought Moonside sucked from a gameplay perspective. Like from a flavor and atmosphere and story perspective, it's really cool. But gameplay, it's so hard that I was like, I would basically save state my way through all the screens to get through that. And I did the same thing in the final dungeon too, after you turn into robots. Which, God, what a weird fucking game. But I was just like save stating my way through these. Huh?
I was going to say, yeah, you turn into robots and then you go into the vagina cave.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I forgot.
You fight the womb.
Yeah, I totally forgot that is part of that thing. Yeah, that's very strange. But yeah, a lot of those dungeons at the end, like back half of the game, I thought were really not fun, except for Dungeon Man. Dungeon Man rules.
I think part of the thing too is that they're incredibly linear, and that can get pretty monotonous at times. There's sometimes you can go off like the beaten path and find like a present, and
Right.
you might be able to find something of use in there as long as you've got the inventory space. You could probably find something useful in there, but most of the time it's very much just kind of like a straight path to the boss. So one of the more memorable moments for me is after so you fight, I think he's called like Electric Spectre or something like that. He's like this giant metal thing with like sound waves all around him and everything. The one thing we didn't actually talk about is the backgrounds of the battle screens.
Yeah.
The battle screens. We didn't talk about that at all.
Yeah. We didn't talk about visuals much. We should have.
I mean, I think the game looks absolutely great. I think it holds up graphically.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
At the time, like this had like it had like the Wind Waker effect, where besides for like the absolutely awful marketing campaign that Nintendo did for this game, a lot of the reasons why people didn't play Earthbound is because they're like, well, this looks like a child's game, just like the way they did with Wind Waker.
Right.
And all those people were wrong. But that's just one of those things that didn't help the sales of Earthbound, because people looked at Final Fantasy VI and they're like, holy shit, this looks so awesome, super realistic, whatever. And then you've got Earthbound, which by today's standards still looks really great. And then it's got those battle screens in which the backgrounds are like this weird psychedelic magic eye fuckery that
Yeah. Like kaleidoscope shit.
Yeah, the guy who designed those made 500 different one of those.
Jesus.
And it was just something that he was doing in his free time. And I think somebody saw him. I don't know if it was a toy or not, but he was just like, can you make more of those so we can put it in the game? And he's like, hell yeah. So it's just like this one guy who made like a ton of those. It's I think you can like go on starman.net or like Google it, and it's just like this huge one just JPEG picture of all of like a sample of all of them.
Oh, that's
fucking
cool.
crazy looking. But
yeah,
what was I talking about? So like Lumine Hall is like, we haven't really talked about like the seriousness of this game and like how serious it can kind of get, but
yeah,
this is one
there.
of the scenes. Yeah, this is one of the scenes that actually kind of always hits me no matter what. Because after you beat that boss, you are in this like cavern, and there's like this, I don't know what you want to call it. Like it looks like something you would see in Times Square. It's like this rolling, what do you call it? It's almost like an LED board in like the middle of this cave.
Yeah.
And it has like this text scrolling on it or whatever. And you get this like really kind of heartfelt message being like, look at how far you've come, blah, blah, blah. You know, if you went through all this hardship. But again, there are definite areas where this game gets there's incredibly high difficulty spikes, like the gold mine that we talked about.
Yep.
But then you catch like this moment of like Ness as a baby with his dad and his mom. And you're just, again, it's one of those moments where you have to remember like, oh, these are just kids. And then, I don't know, it just makes me feel nostalgic for my own childhood. And it's just like this really nice, touching moment. And it's just like, oh, this all started because Ness woke up in the middle of the night because of a meteor crash, you know?
Right.
And they go through this whole adventure. They get home. They literally get homesick. Some of them get kidnapped, and really just being pushed in like these very uncomfortable situations. As much as I ragged on Pooh, I mean, he literally has to like give up his being to like, it's like this very interesting little like self-reflective boss fight that you have, that as a kid, like I had no idea how to fight this thing, but it was literally just like, no, you have to let this being take your arms, take your legs, take your eyes, and basically like just take your consciousness. And it's just like this very like really weird like Buddhist, like super deep Buddhist teaching or something that it's just like far beyond any like child's understanding.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know, that it's just
That
like
was
it's in this game where like 1 minute, like you said, you're fighting this guy who becomes a dungeon himself. And then-
yeah. That thing with Pooh when he's going through his trial was pretty brutal. Like you're right, like so the game goes kind of like turns on a dime sometimes from like, you know, very funny and pop culture references and, you know, stuff like that to Pooh's going through this mental trial where the person you have to basically accept, he's like, okay, now I'm going to take your legs. And you're like, ooh, oh, okay, interesting. All right. Now I'm going to take your arms. Okay, I don't like the sound of this. Then he's like, now I'm going to take your eyes. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like what is happening here? And that whole thing started, I actually got confused during that part because you have to sit perfectly still and like people will come and like distract you. They'll say like, Pooh, your father wants you, but you have to like ignore everything. And that was interesting. There's a couple parts, that remember that part under the waterfall where you say the password and you have to like put the controller down for 3 minutes or something.
That's one of those things that like I find completely unforgivable. But the fact that the game came with a player's guide was like,
yeah,
because like if you didn't have a player's guide, you would just have at that point in the game, you'd have no idea what to do.
Yeah, you would put the control, you would say fuck this, put the controller down, and then you'd walk back to it 15 minutes later and the door's open. That's the only way you would figure it out. You're right. It's basically, it's very hostile towards the player, but at the same time, it's very funny if you're playing with the player's guide. Both of those scenarios where you have to basically sit and do nothing. The one with Pooh, I guess you could figure it out if you kind of understand that, idea that you're supposed to block out all of the outside noise and stuff like that.
Another part of the game that always kind of affects me is when we are first introduced to Jeff, when his part in Winters or whatever.
With his dad, you mean?
Well, not even that. So until I did my research for the show, I would always get to that part and like, I don't know if it's just the visual look of Winters. I don't know if it's the combination of the music and that or just the dialogue, but I always just got like, even as a child, kind of like this somber, it just has a somber tone to it. And I don't know if you got that as well.
Only from the kind of like upfront relationship between Jeff and his dad, where like he works with his dad, but he doesn't call him dad. He calls him, like Dr. So-and-so. And I think it's only at the end of the game when they're ever like, Jeff and his dad have a, loving family relationship now, if I'm remembering that right. That's the only one.
I'm going to be the weird fanboy and probably read into this and it probably means nothing at all. But I found out I always kind of felt it not only with, by the way, his dad's name is Dr. and Donuts.
That's right. Yeah.
So, but also with, Jeff's friend, Tony, who also was like his schoolmate or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I found out that Itoi wanted to specifically make sure to know that like Jeff and Tony were like in a couple, like they were in a relationship actually.
Okay.
And I now knowing that, like looking at the dialogue and then like also realizing that Jeff has like this now greater responsibility or whatever to go help Ness and Paula. And then knowing that him and his father have like this kind of frayed relationship that might have to do with his sexuality is kind of like,
yeah.
Like,
I can see that.
Like, no wonder I always kind of got this weird tone to this part of the game because it just seems a little more sad than usual than it should.
Yeah, and that makes sense in a way, like, because also this was, I already forgot the year, 1995, 1994 in Japan,
yeah,
right?
94, 95, yep.
I have a hard time believing that a popular JRPG would put something like that front and center in a game, at that time. It's only even very recently. Actually, that's not true because Silent Hill 2 came out in 2000 and they deal with all kinds of weird shit. But 2001. But like, actually, in JRPGs, I haven't played a lot of the Shin Megami Tensei games. So I know they go into some stuff. Persona is obviously kind of famous for that kind of stuff too. But like these older JRPGs don't go into stuff like that a whole lot. So that would make sense. If there is merit to it, it would make sense that it's very, very coded and not front and center. That's the reason why Jeff and his dad have such a distant relationship there.
Yeah, I'm being presumptuous about the relationship between him and his father, but Atoy definitely has said that Tony is gay. So
okay,
we know that much, but as far as anything beyond that, like, I'm just kind of making stuff up, trying to put the puzzle pieces together. But
I mean, even if you are making stuff up, I don't think it's a huge stretch at all to put the puzzle pieces together that way. So yeah,
I was just gonna say also, like, you have to think about that this game was very much targeted at Americans, and I mean, we're still dealing with issues around sexuality today, but it was very much like not an accepted or talked about thing back in the 90s.
Right. Yeah. For sure. Let's
go
ahead.
I was going to say, did you want to talk about this final boss, or?
Yeah, so I was going to say, like, first, I just want to mention we danced around this in the non-spoiler section, but I think one of the coolest moments in the game is before the final boss, when you go to this, like, Ness's subconscious level, and you're going around talking to all the people that you've met throughout the journey and stuff like that. And then at the end of it, you basically defeat the phantom version of Ness, and you get, and this is like the coolest fucking thing. I don't know why more games don't do this. You get the ultimate level up, right? And I think it's random, right? I heard it's random. But in my game, Ness got like 500 extra HP and like basically enough PP to like never worry about using spells ever again. And it basically turned Ness into like a monster, basically, not in a bad way. Ness is a powerhouse after this, and like this is the coolest thing, man. Like you go through this like super empowering story moment, and your character mechanically is now a powerhouse. I don't know why more RPGs, especially JRPGs, where like your levels and stuff like this really matter. Why are they so afraid to do this? It's really cool.
It's such a corny, on its face, it's such a corny way to show like character progression, but also it's like incredibly practical. It makes total sense for what's happening in the game.
Yeah. And there's so many other games where you go through similar, like you've overcome something, or like there is some, just like there's so many JRPGs where your character has, gone Super Saiyan for whatever, lack of a better example. But it's not you don't gain 25 levels and you don't gain 700 hit points by doing it. And it's the end of Earthbound, so they can do this. And, the end of the game is kind of built around this, where Ness is basically invincible after this. But like, I don't know, I think it's really cool. And I think, if another game were to copy this, it would also be cool because it's a really empowering moment. It's a moment that's supposed to feel empowering for Ness as a character. And then it does mechanically as well. It's really, I like that a lot.
And for all intents and purposes, you're not like invincible, but it is just like, oh yeah, thank you. I don't have to go into this final boss and be worried about where I need to be level wise. Right, know?
Exactly.
And I didn't know that it was random. I would assume that there's probably like a ceiling that is hit where it's like, depending on what level you're already at, it will just, so like if you're at level, 25, it'll level you up to like 35 no matter what or something like that.
I would assume there's a ceiling and a floor for how many levels or how many hit points and how many PP you get in that big level up. I would assume that you're not going to hit that and it's like, congrats, you gained 5 HP. You're not going to get that.
Yeah.
And you're not going to gain 7,000 HP either. But it's enough to... Ness can still die and stuff, obviously, but like it's enough to where like you've made it this far in the game, you understand the combat system. Ness is basically invincible unless you fuck around, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's talk about that final boss.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, do you know the whole like theory out there? And I could see where people get this theory. I don't necessarily subscribe to it. The whole game is actually about abortion, which in a lot of ways, like I could see where people get that, especially leading up to that final encounter, but I don't know.
Yeah, without seeing the theory, my first instinct is that people have had, I'm doing math, 28 years to dissect and analyze this game, and it's given people enough time to come up with some theories that are far beyond what the developers were going for. I think but I'm me as a person, I'm generally very anti-fan theory, because I just think fans take it too far a lot of times,
right?
So yeah, I don't buy it. But I haven't seen that theory. I'm sure that, someone has had long enough to go beat by beat and find a way to make it work for whatever theory they have. I've been seeing some theories around Bloodborne recently that I think also work the same way, where people are like, I will make this plot beat twist to fit my personal theory instead of working from what the plot gives you to like kind of figure out what is the plot actually saying. That's what I think, but I haven't seen that theory. I did not for a second play this game and think this is about abortion. Like not even when you're literally walking down some fucking fallopian tubes. Never.
Yeah, I don't know like the theory verbatim, so I'm not even going to really repeat it, but it's floating out there and take it for what it's worth.
Yeah.
It
could be interesting reading if anyone wants to read up on it. I guess you can have your cursed Google search Earthbound abortion and see where that takes you. But the final boss against Gigas, I think, is really cool because I was definitely not expecting this. I was expecting fighting Lavos, something like that. And this is not that.
Yeah, it's like this weird, like, Lovecraftian thing. We talked about the backgrounds briefly and how they are just kind of like this weird psychedelic type of background. And that's kind of what the whole thing with Gigas is. It's just that background. There's not any one enemy on the screen, really. It's just this thing that you cannot comprehend.
Yeah, I think it even says that. I think the game, like some of the text even says, like, you can't process what this thing is. And I think that's super cool.
Yeah, and it's not one, thinking back to like Final Fantasy IV, the battle in Final Fantasy IV and Earthbound, our final battles are very similar. You at some point you just realize that you're not going to be able to kill this thing. And so then you kind of eventually start, as your team members are fucking just getting hammered and slowly dying or whatever, you have to, and I don't know how you found this out, maybe you read the guide or whatever, but eventually you just realize there's this ability that Paula has called Prey. And you don't really use it that much throughout the game. You can. I think it does.
I'll take it one step further, dude. It is useless throughout the game, in my opinion.
Sometimes it does. It's kind of like a dice roll in a lot of ways, where it's like sometimes it'll do something. Sometimes it might heal a status ailment, or it might heal somebody, or it might heal the entire party, but it's completely random. And most of the time it does, like you said, it does nothing. It's completely, you may as well just not use it at all, because if you're in trouble and you need to use that, there's no way you're relying on it.
Right. Yeah.
So that you start using, so that's like your only way out of this, and you start praying, and all of a sudden the battle takes this twist where you're revisiting parts of the game, or you're revisiting certain characters that have helped you along on the journey. It's akin to essentially Goku's Spirit Bomb, where Paula is just asking for everybody's strength to essentially turn Gygus into nothing. And this isn't, again, like I've said plenty of times, Earthbound isn't inherently doing anything new. It's just what it does with the sum of its parts, and it turns it into something that's a little more endearing than fighting God at the end of Final Fantasy IV. So
I actually thought that Gygus was new-ish. Like, I guess I haven't played Final Fantasy IV, so maybe that plays into it. But like, I thought it was really cool that, first of all, Gygus is not this big, just a big alien monster. It's literally this cosmic horror that you cannot process or comprehend. That's cool. I thought it's also cool that Gygus is not smart. Like, Gygus is not this intelligent creature from beyond. It's just this idiot force of chaos, basically. And like, there's parts in the fight where Gygus like clearly doesn't understand what's happening at during the fight, and you get some moments of pathos for Gygus, because it's like Gygus is in pain and it doesn't understand why and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, I did not expect to feel bad for this cosmic, entity of chaos at the end of this game, but you do get that. So I thought that was very unique, especially for a final boss fight. I'll be honest, dude. I think the boss fights in this game are kind of uniformly frustrating, I'll say. Like, I think I mentioned this earlier in the show, but like, I feel like most boss fights are very RNG dependent. Like, are they going to use their party wipe move 4 times in a row? If so, I lose, and if not, I win. So I was really gearing up for a really frustrating and bad boss fight here, and I was like so happy, both with like the, theming and like how this fight actually works, and with like the characterization of Gygus at the end. I really like this a lot. But you asked how I would figure out about the praying thing. I was reading the guide, so I knew to do it. If I was not reading a guide, I would have never figured this out. And so I don't know, is there a clue in the actual game itself that you should be praying? Because like I said earlier, I used pray when I first got Paula. I used pray a few times just to see what it did. I quickly learned that it was basically useless, or unreliable is a better word. So I would have never thought to use it at the end. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Do you remember, like, since you've played this game more times than me, is there a clue in the game itself that you should be using it?
I'm trying to think, and I'm not. So the first time I beat this game when I was a kid, I got to Gygus, and I was at my friend's house, and it was my first time fighting this dude, and I did not have the guide with me. And so I was just, as you can imagine, not doing very well at the fight at all.
Yeah.
And after a couple of tries, I don't know what triggered me to think like, well, I'm just going to hit pray because I literally have done everything else in my power.
Yeah.
And then when you think in the context of what praying is, and when people, and I don't mean this like in a terrible way, or don't take this as like something being negative, but when people are in desperate times, usually they just rely on prayer, no matter what it is. They try to talk to a higher power or whatever to get them through whatever's happening. And so in a lot of ways, I was like, so I hit pray, and then all of a sudden a different message came up.
Yeah,
and
something
something different
happened.
was happening on screen. Yes, and then me and my friend unanimously just fucking started freaking out. But by that time, like, it was already too late in the battle, because Gigas will still attack you.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
at that point, like, Paula dies anyway, I start over, and now I know, oh, I have to hit prey at some point. I have to keep doing this. And that's how I originally found out. Now, since then, since I have played this game so many times and I know that now,
Right.
I honestly cannot tell you if the game even clues you in that you need to do that.
Because I was praying right from the beginning, so I don't know if you go through this fight and like someone, there's dialogue from one of your characters or something that says, hey, we need to try something different or something like that. But it sounds like you guys, I think it sounds like the thought process that you guys had to try praying is the intended thought process, where you're literally like, I don't know what else to do, might as well pray, I think that if I were to put myself in the developer's shoes, I think that's the thought process that they're intending. But I also, I like that in theory, but in practice, I would have been very frustrated because I would have thought like, okay, I could hit pray, but pray's been useless this entire game, so it's not going to be the first thing I go towards. But that's just me. But you got it, and you were a little kid, so who knows,
But also, like, Earthbound wasn't my first JRPG either.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's an excuse or not. Either way, I was going to say something, but I lost my thought.
That's all right. This is a very cool moment at the end when you're praying and you're getting strength from all of the people around the world. It's kind of like it's one of two basically tours through your adventure from beginning to end, I guess. And I
remember what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was a really cool moment as you're going through, because you have to pray like, I don't know, 8 times or something like that, or 16 times. It's a lot.
It's quite a while.
You get all of these people throughout your adventure praying for you. And like, I think it's one of a handful of moments where I was like kind of getting these, chills as you go through the story. Yeah, good moment.
So going back real quick to whether or not the game tells you if you need to pray or not, there is a moment before you, essentially, like, the last fight takes place in the future. Uh-huh. So before you head off into the future, there is kind of like this little bit of pep talk. There's a pep talk that you have with everybody before you leave. And so I wonder if there's maybe like a drop line of dialogue in there where they're like, everybody's counting on you, and in last minutes of desperation, we'll all be here for you, or something. Or maybe there's something like that in there, but otherwise, I don't really know.
There might be, but anyway, I think we've gotten through that. Like, you arrived at that conclusion. You're not the first person that I've heard explain it that way, as the way that they've come to that conclusion. Basically, like, exhausted all their other options, and so they're like, fuck it, I guess
it's just dumb luck.
I'll see what prey does, so thinking as like in a critical way, I don't think that that's great mechanically, but thematically it's very cool, and if you are able to come to it naturally, it's even cooler, I think. So I guess, like, after you beat Gigas, we already talked about how at the end you can kind of go back through the world and talk to people, and they have different things to say. They'll thank you for like saving the world, which I'm sure that was probably like really cool at the time as you were doing that. And like I said before, most games don't do this. People are barely aware that you saved the universe at the end of most games, if you're even allowed to go talk to people at the end. But the last thing that I wanted to mention is throughout the game, you'll get stopped at key moments throughout the story by the photography guy.
Yes.
And as I was playing this, number one, this was very helpful for me to know that I was on the right track. I was making progress. Like, oh, I'm supposed to be here. The camera guy's here. So that was cool. But I knew from the very beginning I was going to get a slideshow at the end of the credits. Like I figured that out. And it was awesome. I love it. It's so cool. Give me slideshows.
So my question is, did you like it when it was happening in the game, though?
Yes.
Because I know there's a lot of people that have scrutinized that. It was just like, well, it always just stops the game dead. And I'm like, dude, it's only like 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's 10 seconds long. And like I
Right.
said, like when the camera guy came, I instantly knew like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. Because the camera guy doesn't just come randomly. He only comes when you get to the next story beat, you know?
Right.
So I appreciated that as like some positive reinforcement. And then I knew at the end I was going to get a slideshow of those pictures. And I love it. I love any game that gives you a like the adventure at like in the credits or something like that. I love when any game does that, especially games that are long, you know, because I don't remember all these story beats at the end of the game. So there was a lot of times those pictures came up and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember, you know, the picture with Dungeon Man and stuff like that. So yeah.
I always really like that stuff. But it's not in this game, but one of my favorite things, and I talk about it on my show a lot when it happens, is when basically during the credits scene, you will get almost like a staff roll or something, as if the video game was a movie, and it gives you all of the credits of like the characters and the enemy characters and all their names and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of one of those things. It's not exactly that, but yeah, getting to look at all of like the places you visited. Once again, one of those things where it's like, man, you just killed like this alien being that you cannot even conceptualize, you know, and you know, oh, here we are, you know, getting hot dogs in this summer resort town or whatever. Like, you know, just really makes it super down to earth, and
exactly.
It's good shit, man.
Yeah.
So as somebody who is a photographer and has worked with many photographers who have said the word fuzzy pickles to their subjects, the people they're photographing, I always sit there and I wonder, did you ever play Earthbound? Like, do you know why you're saying this? And I don't know if fuzzy pickles came from Earthbound. Like, I don't know if it was the first thing in media to use fuzzy pickles, but
right.
I mean, I can't think of anything else, honestly.
Right. Yeah, I got to imagine it came from Earthbound, and then some photographer, it's like a thing that like a bunch of photographers are like, you know what? I don't actually know why I say fuzzy pickles. The guy who taught me photography, he said fuzzy pickles.
Right.
And it's like one of these like inside baseball things that like only photographers understand, but it's actually from Earthbound. So none of them understand.
I have never used it because I think it's just, I feel like it's going to be one of those things where I'm going to say it and it's going to be that awkward moment where that person's just going to be like, oh, I played Earthbound too. And then I'm like, well, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Like, this just got awkward.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, do you want to ask the cameraman if they played Earthbound? But you know in your head, if the answer is yes, then they're going to want to talk to you about it. Or they're not going to want to, and they're going to be like, oh, God, I got to stop saying fuzzy pickles. Just say cheese like a regular person.
That's why I've never brought it up to like anybody that I've worked with or whatever. I'm just like...
It's a lose-lose.
It's just going to be an inside thing for me.
Yeah. Or you're just going to be like, you know, did you play Earthbound, you fucking nerd? Oh, man. Anything else? Any other story beats or anything you want to talk about?
Man, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know, man.
All right. Well, we can call it. We can just call it here. Then it has been. Oh man, it's been a long one, but it was a good time, man. Talking Earthbound.
I think it deserves the amount of time that we spent talking about it, honestly.
Yeah, it's weird. I would like to say that there's a correlation between games and like how much discussion they deserve with how long Tales from the Backlog episodes are. It doesn't always turn out this way, but if we've talked for this long, it's because we had this many things to say, this many things to talk about. So
right.
Yeah, it's been a good time, Keith. Thanks for coming on the show. Earthbound is, a game that, like I said before, I'm not sure I wouldn't recommend this game to everybody, but there are a lot of cool things in here, a lot of unique things that obviously I couldn't mention before the spoiler wall, but a lot of the things we've mentioned in the spoiler section are cool to dive into and things you might not expect from maybe the first few hours of the game, for sure.
Yeah, first of all, I really appreciate you having me on. This is a long time coming. I've been listening to you for a while now, and every podcast, again, kind of like what you said, there are some, and I've already told you this off air, but there are some episodes where it's like, I'll go to your podcast and be like, oh, I can't listen to that because I intend on playing that. But
right.
For the most part, if there's a game where I'm just like, I have no reason to play this ever, and I don't know what this is, I listen to it because it's usually just a really good conversation. I'm not looking for validation for my taste in video games anyway, so no matter what you guys say, it doesn't matter to me, just as long as it's
right.
Really good to listen to, and that's just it's just the kind of podcast I'm always looking for, and you deliver constantly all the time, and I'm just very happy that you would allow me to, and I knew coming on this that I would have to probably defend Earthbound, but also I definitely see where you're coming from, having played it for the first time and everything.
Yeah, that's what I
some
hope.
Things just can't be defended, like a terrible inventory system.
That the inventory system's indefensible, and like at least I hope that I always hope that if I am saying that something in a game is bad or that I didn't enjoy something, that I explain myself in a way where even if you disagree, if you like the combat in Earthbound, you understand why I don't like it, and
right.
I did a good job of explaining myself. That's what I hope.
But yeah, no, just thanks for having me on, dude. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you have an open invitation. Anytime you want to come on and talk about a game, happy to have you back. And again, everyone listening, if you've made it this far, go get a glass of water. You've earned it, or a beer. You've earned a beer after this one,
or maybe a hot cup of psychedelic tea.
Yes, you have earned a psychedelic journey from a cup of tea. That's another thing we didn't mention, but those were a trip throughout the game. Yeah. But anyway, dude, open invitation anytime you want to come back. People out there, you should check out the main quest. It's very, very good. And join us next time with me and my next guest for the next game that comes out of the backlog.